Everybody this fine afternoon. Y'all ready to go through the class on how to get rich in real estate without really trying? Oh, excuse me, wait, wrong class. This is understanding the purchase agreement that is commercially oriented. Now, those of you who've been through my classes before, I apologize. I'm going to cover some of the things we cover in those other classes because the commercial purchase agreement was written up by the same group, and that is Standard Forms, and they took a lot of what that is basic law and put it into the same contract. So let me go ahead and tell you a little bit about who I am. If you need to get in touch with me, my email is joel@joelcarlson. My telephone number's there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, anywhere in the world. Now, you know what the problem is with that. If you call me and you're not in the database, you're going to go to voicemail. That's just because I got over 8,000 contacts in here over the time that I've been doing this. So just leave your messages. I am the owner broker of JC Realty. I've been such for many, many moons. I am also a GRI, Graduate Realtor Institute, which is a national designation. A lot of times people say, well, I don't, your clients, I don't know what a GRI is. A GRI says that you took 14 days of your life to gain more knowledge and become a better professional. So I teach 3 of the classes in the GRI. I'm also an instructor with CAR, so I teach a lot of the designation classes. And I'm also a designated instructor for the National Association. Before COVID, I was flying all over the United States talking about real estate in many different states, in 40 different states in the United States. So I had a little fun with that, but now everything is Zoom, or go to meeting.com or whatever else. I'm also a certified real estate consultant from the American College. Basically, I just wanted more alphabet soup after my name, so that's why I got another designation. So actually, the reason I got this particular designation is when I'm working with buyers. Oh, wait a minute, let me ask you something. How many of you dealt with a buyer, showed them everything in the multiple listing service, and they bought through somebody else? I've been in the real estate business more than 15 minutes. Well, after that happened a number of times, I said, you know what? The next time somebody wants to pick my brain and waste my time, I'm going to charge them, just like any other real estate professional would. You see, I call you real estate professionals because you are defined as such under our state constitution. We have a constitution here in California. It was codified in 1879. It said, if you have a state-issued license, that's the Department of Real Estate, and a requirement of continuing education, that's 45 hours every 4 years, you are considered a professional in the state of California. As professionals, are we held to a higher standard? Absolutely. Then I want to be compensated at that higher standard. So my office policy at MJC Realty in Newport Beach is you walk into my office, say, I'd like to buy real estate. I say, terrific. The first half hour is free. After that, you either sign a buyer representation agreement or a fee agreement. If you will not do that, don't let the door hit you on the way out. You see, I've gotten old and grumpy. I don't have to put up with the boneheads anymore. Now, that brings me to my 3 caveats. A caveat is a promise to do or not to do something. Here's all I promise to do today. I'm going to talk to you about commercial properties. Commercial. Okay. My second caveat is I will tell you what the laws are that are ancillary to that, whether it's Business and Professions Code, Civil Code, or Commissioner's Regulations. But my last caveat is the most important, and that is it doesn't matter what I say here. It matters what your broker says, because your broker is ultimately liable for whatever you do under 101(3)(1) of the Business and Professions Code. So if I say I use buyer representation agreements, don't go back to your broker and say Joel said, because then I get in trouble. Just go back and say, hi, I was in class today. I learned some things. What's our policy? So you have a clearer understanding of how you are to represent that company as a real estate professional. So that's a little bit about me. What I'd like to do is have each and every one of you stand up. Tell me how long you've been in the real estate business, how much money you have. No, we did that. We wouldn't get out of here till next week. I mean, I just love to. So anyway, we'll put this over here. Save that. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. What we're doing is we're looking at the California Association of Realtors website here. Now, I'm not sure what the significance is of the person sitting in the chair, but here's what I assumed it was. If you're sitting in the chair in the front page of the California Association of Realtors website, you must be a top producer. So I don't do business in Tracy. I've learned you need to be knowledgeable in the area in which you're dealing. And even though we're licensed to sell California real estate, if I don't know the area, I always want to find a certain broker up there that I can refer to. So I'd say, Johanna, I'd like to refer something to you. I refer her a buyer, I refer her a seller. She sells them something. She lists the property and sells it. She sends me a referral fee. What did I do to earn that fee? Hello? I love this business. This is the only business I know that you can get paid for doing nothing. So I do a lot of referrals because I've learned in the short period of time I've been doing this business, you can't know everything, number one. Number two, you have to be very careful where the areas are that you sell real estate, list real estate, because you must be knowledgeable in the area in which you deal. And so what I do is get in touch with her. I'm not sure what the significance is of her sitting in the chair, but I figured it was because I could get in touch with her. So I came down here and it said, if you'd like to have your picture taken in the chair, fill out the application. Wait a minute, I thought I could get in touch with her. Oh, no, can't get in touch. So I went ahead and I filled out the application. What the heck? You might as well have some fun with this somehow. So with that in mind, let's go on over here and talk about the RPA. Now, there's two different ways we can do that. We can go to the California Association of Realtors website, and it's set up. Now, the RPA was under Zip Forms. Zip Forms was owned by NAR and CAR. They were the owners of that. They decided, you know what, we're real estate professionals. We should probably deal in real estate. We should let people who are propeller heads or technology people deal with our forms. So Lone Wolf is a technology forms real estate company. So they took it over and they call it transactions. It's a Zip Forms edition, so it's a Lone Wolf transaction. Same. Nothing's changed yet. I always wait for the second shoe whenever these kinds of things come. So we click on that. You go to the California Association of Real. Oh yeah, we got to put in our username and do we have enough usernames and passwords? You need some extras? I got some extras. Then we have to pay our dues. Okay, I paid my dues. And then we go into, now, the problem that I have using this for a class is it's takes time to get up. It's got advertisement on it. We got to get into this. We got to get into that. So this is where I always go to do transactions. But when I teach classes, I use what's called Zip Forms Standard. This is Zip Forms Standard, and this is what I'm going to be using today. The reason I'm bringing this up is you'll look at this, say, where did you get this? Well, this is at the California Association of Realtors website. If you come to car.org and you click on this tab up here called Transaction Center, you have Lone Wolf Zip Forms Edition, and then right below it, you have Zip Forms Standard. If you click on Zip Form Standard, it says, hi, you already have paid for this. This is a program that resides in your computer. If you cannot get an internet connection, you cannot get to Lone Wolf transactions. This is web-based. So many moons ago, Albert Tran, who is the executive officer at the West San Gabriel Association of Realtors, decided that we needed to have something that was on our computers. So he went ahead and he made sure that we had this program available to us. Let me go ahead and make sure. Okay. Now, this resides on your computer. If you don't have an internet connection, you can still use this program. And where you find it is you come to car.org. Let me get back here to car.org. Zip Form Standard. You just come down here and you download it. It's just like any other program. You say, well, I do everything online. I understand that, but if you can't get an internet connection, and the worst one is you can get an internet connection, but it's here, then it's gone. Then it's here, then it's gone. And you're sitting in front of your clients and your clients are going, oh, I got a good one. Can't even figure out his computer. So what I'm showing you is you can download this. If you're a propeller head, you understand Mac You can download a Mac or a PC. You just put it in there, it verifies your information, and now you have it on your computer. So this is what I'm going to be using for class today. It's called Zip Form Standard. It does everything that the Zip Forms does. You just don't have to be connected to the internet. All right. So periodically, I'm going to look up here and make sure I don't have any questions. If you do have questions, up right above where it says participants, right next to it has a little balloon, and it, no, maybe you might have to go over to go to chat, click on chat, and just type in your question. We got a lot of information to cover here if we're going to get done by 7 p.m. Oh, that caught your attention. No, we're done at 4 o'clock. And we're going to go over a lot of different things. About 50% of the form is already in Zip Forms under our PA, Residential Purchase Agreement. But there is some significant differences in the commercial, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, one is this disclosure regarding agency. Agency has been law since 1988. Nothing has changed in the law since 1988. It is still a 3-step process: disclose, elect, and confirm. It is still codified under 2079 of the Civil Code. But of all the classes I teach, this is the most misunderstood. But of all the classes I teach, this is the most important, because it says under Civil Code, or Business and Professions Code, 2079 of the Civil Code, that if you do not follow the 3 steps properly, disclose, elect, and confirm, you're not entitled to a commission. I don't know about you, but that's how I get paid. So when I heard about this in 1980, I said, I'm going to learn this puppy. So let's do a little review of this. So this form tells the people exactly what your position is. And it's required on the sale of all real property in the state of California now. You must give them the disclosure regarding your agency relationship. And it says, if you represent the seller exclusively, you have a fiduciary duty of utmost care, integrity, honesty, and loyalty in dealings with that seller. If you represent the buyer exclusively, it says you have a fiduciary duty of utmost care, integrity, honesty, and loyalty. So no matter who you represent, you have a fiduciary duty. Fiduciary duty is defined under Black's Law Dictionary as highest binding trust. So you have the highest binding trust with your client. But it goes on to say that no, if you are representing the seller exclusively, you have fiduciary duty to them. You have 3 more duties to both buyer and seller. To both buyer and seller, you have a diligent exercise of reasonable skill and care in the performance of your duties. You have a duty of honest and fair dealings and in good faith. And this is the biggie. This is Easton versus Strasburger, 1984. This is the granddaddy of all of our disclosure classes. And it says, you have a duty to disclose all facts known by the agent materially affecting the value or desirability of the property. So if you represent the seller exclusively, you have fiduciary duty to them, but you have 3 more duties to both buyer and seller. If you represent the buyer exclusively, you have a fiduciary duty to that buyer, but you have 3 more duties to both buyer and seller. Honest and fair dealings, good faith, disclose all facts known. Now, here's the kicker with this whole thing. You must give this agency disclosure out at a specific time in order to comply with the 3 steps: disclose, elect, and confirm. It tells you right on this form when you're to give it out. You hand it to the buyer, you hand it to the seller, and they read it. And here's what they read. The law requires each agent, that's you, with whom you have more than a casual relationship with, whatever that is, to present you with this disclosure form. The law requires that you give this to the buyer, you give this to the seller once you have formed more than a casual relationship. So here's what you got to do. You got to go back to your broker and you got to say, hi, I was in class today. What's a casual relationship? Watch their face when you ask them. This is what it says right here. Now, here's the definition of a casual relationship at my company. And remember, caveat 3, doesn't matter what I say, it matters what your broker says. If your broker says this is what the definition is, that's the definition. Here's my definition at MJC Realty. If you start showing them real property, you'll form more than a casual relationship, you get them to sign this form. If you sit down for a listing presentation, you'll form more than a casual relationship. You get them to sign this form. When they sign this form, does it obligate them to anything? No, it merely tells them what your duties are. It says you have a fiduciary duty and 3 other duties. That's all it says. It is not a buyer representation agreement. Sometimes they look at this, they go, oh, if I sign this, I have to work with you. No, that's not what this says. This says that I'm explaining what my duties are and that I have to give it to you at a specific time. And I've done so. Now, if your broker says, whatever time your broker says, your broker's right. But sometimes you go and ask your broker, when do I give out this form? And they go, what are you talking about? It tells you on the form the last minute in time is before they sign the purchase agreement or the listing agreement. That's what it says. And if you say, well, where are you getting all this from? This is not in here. It's on the back of each form. Right here, under 2079 of the Civil Code. This is all the definitions right here. You move on down. This tells you how to fill out the confirmation part. And then it says right down here what to do if they won't sign it, what to do if you're the dual agent. So everything is explained on this particular form. This is required by law on the sale of all real property in the state of California. You must give them this form. And then if you have any questions about it, the answers are on the back. Now, as we're going through here, remember, I told you, it's important that you talk to your broker about it if you have any questions. They're the ones to ask these questions. However, you say, well, I got a legal question. Well, I'm not an attorney. Don't call me. Call the CAR legal hotline. They will answer your questions there concerning this. And there's a couple of brokers there that will make sure that you get the proper answers on commercial aspects. So let's see here. We got some questions. It says the screen is not changing. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah, that's the thing with Zoom. What it does is it will share and then it won't share. My apologies. See, when I do a lot of classes through gotomeeting.com, whatever screen I'm on, it stays in there. And if I take this, if I go through and I share the screen that I'm looking at, you'll see all sorts of other things in there, other people and stuff like that. I've been doing this long enough. Sometimes you don't want to see what other people are doing when they're out there. All right. So the form you have is in your, this form is on all, it's on the RPA, the Residential Purchase Agreement. It's on the our IPA, Residential Income Purchase Agreement. And it's on the CPA. And what we're talking about here, this is the Commercial Purchase Agreement. That's what we're talking about here. This form is always, and it tells you exactly when to give it out. You just have to find out from your broker. So this fiduciary duty, it goes on and it talks about you have duties to 3 other agents and that you have a fiduciary duty. And right down here, it says the law requires each agent with whom you have more than a casual relationship to give you a copy of this form. So make sure I'm sharing the right form. Good. Let me make sure I've got all the questions answered here under chat. All right, screen, same here. Yeah, okay, there we go. My apologies. Good. So make sure that if you don't see what I'm talking about, I'm going to have it on my screen and talking about, just give me a little click on the chat bar and I'll get back onto that. All right. So this is what's referred to as the agency disclosure form. This must be filled out by you and given to the buyer once you form more than a casual relationship, whatever that is. Okay. Your broker going to have that definition. Now, we work our way down on this form. Now, you have to understand, this purchase agreement, 11 pages, but the forms involved required by law, they're 17 pages. So the next one that we have talks about fraud, wire fraud. Now, wire fraud has become a problem because what happens is you or your buyers or your sellers go someplace, they get free Wi-Fi, and it ain't always free, and around them someplace is a hacker. And what happens is that hacker has a way they can follow that Wi-Fi into your computer. They can see what you're doing in there. So you're communicating with your buyer. You're telling your buyer, here's the escrow company. Contact the escrow company. Here's an email from the escrow company. The hacker sees that email and they spoof it. That means they copy it. They then have your buyer's email address, so they email back to your buyer saying, hi, this is the escrow company. When you're going to wire the money to this wiring address. Well, that wiring address is someplace in East Uganda. And when the buyer wires it there, it's gone. And who's the only person left in town? You. So we had a couple of court cases where we have lost as realtors, so we put this form in here. It says, hi, do a two-step process, buyer. You're going to be wiring money. Make sure when you first introduce yourself to that escrow company, get a magic word or a magic something that only you know, that is not in writing here, that is on, that you and the title or escrow company have agreed to. So now when you get that email and it says, hi, wire money, you call up escrow, you say, hi, this is Joel Carlson. I've just received an email to wire money. What's the magic code? And if they say, we never emailed you anything, then you know it was a scam. Now, there's a way you can protect yourself. And I teach the technology classes for the GRI program. The way that you can protect yourself is what's called a VPN, a virtual private network. Some computers have them built in. Some you can buy. I use Hotspot Shield. Okay. Now, Hotspot Shield is not the end all, the beat all. I found it many years ago. At that moment in time, it was free. Is anything free? No. What they did is they put advertising on it till finally I said, okay, fine, I'll pay for it. So here's what happens. I start my VPN, virtual private network, and I run it all the time whenever I'm working with the Wi-Fi, because you never know within 300 feet who can get into your computer, and I want them in my computer. It takes them to some place, and they have all sorts of nodes all over the United States and the world, this particular one. As a matter of fact, I have a built-in Wi-Fi in my computer, my Lenovo here, a built-in VPN, virtual private network. What happens is the hacker gets into my computer. They go to the Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi takes them straight to wherever it is. Let's suppose Dallas, Texas, and it ends right there. They cannot get into my computer. They just take a one-way trip to Dallas, Texas. It cuts them off, and then I'm protected. My information is protected. So it talks about this in here, having a VPN, and it also talks about it in your Realtor magazine, as well as any of the technology classes. They will always say you need to make sure, if you're using an open Wi-Fi, that you have a VPN. And there's all sorts of different prices out there. I just told you I happen to use Hotspot Shield because it was the first one I stumbled upon, and I'm comfortable with it. So that's what we have with the wire fraud. Then we come on down here to the commercial property agreement. So this particular agreement, if you look at it, it's very similar to the residential purchase agreement. But most of the time, we're going to be dealing with a partnership or a corporation or LLC. So we want to identify those people right off the bat. Now, this date up here, this is your date. This has nothing to do with the buyer and seller. This is a moniker for you to say this. If there's a counteroffer to this, or there's an addendum to this, it says the commercial property purchase agreement dated such and such between the buyers and the sellers. This is an addendum, or this is a counter. So that's just if it was like a number like 864856, it'd be the same thing. We just put the date in there. So if they look at the date and they say, well, that's not when I signed it. No, that has nothing to do with the buyer or the seller. That has to do with you. That gives you a date that you can go from when you have counteroffers, when you have addendums, when you have amendments. You put in the name of the person. Again, if it is ABC LLC or incorporated, then you're going to need another form. It's called an RCSD. We'll talk about it later on. But it basically says this. Hi, the person buying the property is ABC Incorporated. Who's signing the agreement? Whoever's signing the agreement, we want to make sure that they have the right to do so under ABC Inc. or ABC LLC or ABC Trust. And so we're going to have to see that. Now, the reality check is, I don't care. Who cares about that? Title company. If you don't have it, title company is not going to give it to you. Okay. Now, I just saw a question. Joel, I know you're only into a few minutes. When are we going to take a break? Good question. We'll probably take a break about 2 o'clock, another one at 3 o'clock. We're done by 4. Okay. So, and feel free to ask questions. And if you say, well, Joel, I don't want to ask questions, I'll rather email you. Fine. Or I want to call you at 3 o'clock in the morning. Great. Well, it's fine with me. I just want to make sure that you get your questions answered. And the reason for that is, as an instructor with CAR, we used to, twice a year, we had to go downtown LA. We had to sit down there. We had to listen to the attorneys at CAR tell us about all the court cases that we lost. And then we're supposed to tell you about them so you don't make the same mistakes. And they would always start out like this. Hello, my name is attorney such and such. I'm going to talk to you for the next 300 years on some topic. Please hold all your questions to the very end when you've forgotten them. What? No, 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 no. I want to know the answer now. So if you have questions, answer them now. If you have legal questions, area code 213-739-8282. That's the legal hotline. Call them up. If you have war stories, save it for the break or save it for afterwards. I love talking about war stories, but they don't help us through the purchase agreement. So we then check off it's a corporation. And now we know what we're looking for. We put down the property address. We put down what we're purchasing it for. So let's suppose we're purchasing it for $22 million. The thing I love about this, you just type in the numbers. When you hit tab, it automatically puts it in here. It writes it in here for you. And as a product of the LA City School District, I love this because I cannot add, subtract, multiply, divide, or spell. Okay. Oh, let's see what we got here. Joel, is my understanding that the NHD is required for commercial sales. The natural hazards disclosure. The NHD, if you look, it's under 1103 of the Civil Code. It is not required for commercial properties. They may require what's referred to as a phase 1, and that would be from a lender's aspect or between the buyers and sellers. But that's, and they include something with the NHD called an environmental. You're going to have to talk to the company about that. So there's a question about, do you have to put an NHD with this? It is mentioned in here. It's a good idea. It's not required, and I can show you where that is under the law. But a phase 1 may be a part of the negotiations or might be from the lender. Okay, so we'll go into that in a few minutes here. You want to see it now? The disclosure. Okay, so now Lucia's saying, and Stephen is saying, wait a minute, Hot Rod, it's required. Okay, well, let's take a look at that. So, and I'm talking about, there are over 40 standard disclosures in the sale of a single family home owner occupied in the state of California. For commercial, which we're talking about today, it's a little different. But if we come down here and we go into, let's go back to here, we'll go to the Transaction Center. So I'm at the California Association of Realtors website. I went down to this tab, which is Transaction Centers. There's transactions, business tools, and risk management. I was just mousing around one day and I clicked on risk management. Under risk management, when I came down here to the bottom, it said, oh, here's a sales disclosure chart. So I clicked on the sales disclosure chart. This sales disclosure chart is put together by CAR legal staff. This is Member Legal Services, area code 213-739-8282. And it talks about if you're selling 1 to 4 residential units, everything being perfect, it's this column. If you're selling, oh, you're not seeing this, are you? Let me go back here. Thank you for letting me know. Share the screen. Go back here. All right, so here's what I'm looking at, and where I got this from was I went to the California Association of Realtors website. I went to car.org. Let me make sure you're seeing this. Good. All right. So we're seeing this. Then I went to Transaction Center. This is just a tab up here. And I'm looking, I was just mousing around and I came over here to this risk management. And under risk management is when it really got interesting. And I came down to the sales disclosure charts and I clicked on sales disclosure chart. All right. Well, let me see, make sure I'm catching up on all the questions here. Cove said the unit is required to be delivered. Doesn't need to be signed on commercial properties. Okay, here's how this works. Gov is the head attorney at the California Association of Realtors website, or California Association of Realtors. If Gov says yes, then it's yes. I'm never going to argue with Gov. I can only tell you what 1103 of the Civil Code says. So you can look up 1103 of the Civil Code, and we can go into the disclosure chart here. And what the disclosure chart talks about when you come down here is 1 to 4 residential units standard. If it's probate, trust, or bankruptcy, 1 to 4. If it is REO and foreclosures, 1 to 4. Do you think we're going to get a lot of that in the future? I'm getting many requests for classes on REOs and short sales, foreclosures. It's coming. Okay. Then we have 5 units or more. Those are apartments. And then this. So under the commercial, this is what we're talking about today. So in this column, if you look at what's required and what isn't, okay, so here's airport. Yes for residential, no for commercial. Well, that's one of the 6 required under the NHD, Natural Hazardous Disclosure, okay? And it says it's not required, and it says here's the Civil Code on it. So I'm just telling you what this says. And I'm going to tell you something. I've never gotten in trouble for too much disclosure. The NHD is like $75, $100, maybe $95 if you include, you're gonna be kidding me, if you include the environmental. So let me see here. Screen is not changing. All right, Gov said, yes, predicted 60,000. Yeah, it's required. It just doesn't have to be signed. Okay. Then this particular, this is put together by legal staff. So if we look at this particular item, we come up here, this is commercial property. This is what we're talking about. This is yes, yes, no, airport vicinity. That's one of the ones that's on the NHD. No for broker statutory disclosure. That was Easton versus Strasburger. No. Now, if you say, well, I think it's yes, I'm good with that. I told you I've never gotten in trouble for too much disclosure. I'm just looking at the chart that was put together by legal staff at the California Association of Realtors. If you want to include it in there, your broker tells you to include it in there, I would include it. Okay? Combination subdivisions or no. We don't have to do that. Yes for death in the last 3 years. That's a yes all the way across. There's some asterisks there. Then there's earthquake fault zones. This is a yes. Well, that's part of the 6 required by law. So that means you have to have an NHD. And then it has a yes, no energy report. I always love that. Yes, no. You always want to know which yes. That's because it's in 2016. We didn't have to have this for commercial after that period of time. Then it was farm and ranch. No, no, no. These again are in your NHD. There's about 18 here for commercial, where there's over 40 in this column. There's only about 18 in this column. Defensible space, no. FIRPTA, yes, because that's the Foreign Investment Real Property Tax Act. That happened in about 1981. And the commercial sales are what prompted that. The IRS forgot to say, oh, we want to collect taxes when you sell a piece of property. So now we have FIRPTA, the Foreign Investment Real Property Tax Act. State of California in 1983 or 84 said, hey, this is a good idea. We'll have CalFIRPTA. So now we have Foreign Investment Real Property Tax Act and the California Tax Withholding. FIRPTA is 10% up to $1 million, 15% over that, and 3 1/3% for California. So if you don't have a tax ID number, it can be expensive. Flood disaster, gas, electricity. This is what I'm showing you here. These are the forms that are required by law, put together by your legal staff. If you want to do more than this, or your broker tells you to do more than this, or CAR attorneys tell you to do more than this, I'm happy with that. I'm telling you, I've never gotten in trouble for too much disclosure. It's always I forgot something. Okay. So hazardous substances, release of, this is a biggie. This is no, 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 no until we get to commercial. And this has to do with your phase 1, phase 2, and this is under health and safety code. Anytime it's health and safety code, you want to make sure that's taken care of. Then the energy ratings, no, no. Industrial use zone, I would think that would be a yes, but it's not. It was a court case and I go over that in and when I'm doing the residential. Then there's lead-based paint. No, I think that should be a yes. That was 1978. Material facts. Look at this. Yes, 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 yes. I don't care what you're selling in the state of California. If there's a material fact, that must be disclosed. And a material fact is defined as anything that would influence whether the buyer would buy or seller would sell. That's a material fact. And that's one of those why we have so many disclosures now, is you wonder, what does affect them? What are they looking for? Megan's Law is a no. Mello-Roos, no. But all the rest of these are yeses if you're doing 1 to 4 residential units. Meth lab, yes. That's the commercial aspect of it. Ordnance, military, mining, no. Mold, no. Mold is all the way across, no. No, 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 no. And you say, well, what does that mean? Well, some mold is good, some mold is bad. They haven't determined which is the bad mold yet, totally. So we don't have to make that disclosure. If it's a concern to the buyer, then they got to have a professional mold person come and take a sample, grow it, and tell them what kind of mold it is. NHD, it says natural hazards disclosure is a no here. But again, as I said, if Gov says it's a yes, I'm good with that. And for $100, it is very, very good insurance. Let me make sure I'm answering all the questions here. Okay. Flood. Let's see, flooding. It's the heart of the NHD required earthquake, fire. To clarify, 6 disclosures regarding NHD must be made. You do not need the signature page for the statement. All right, well, what I'm seeing here is you don't need to sign, you don't need to sign, you don't need to sign. So I submit it to you, you don't sign it. How do you know I gave it to you? If they don't sign it, I don't know how you know that they gave it to you, because they'll say, no, you never gave it to me. I don't want to get into that circumstance. If I send it to them and there's a place to sign, I probably would prefer that it be signed. Now, again, call CAR, talk to the attorneys. You might have your own attorneys at your own offices. Make sure you're following what they said. Nothing in my introduction said I'm an attorney. I just know that I review the lawsuits that we've lost, and I try to stay out of those kind of problems by getting as much of this stuff signed as possible. So I love the fact that you're saying get it signed or don't get it signed, but make sure it's submitted, verify it through some other means that you gave it to them. Again, never gotten any trouble for too much disclosure. As always, I forgot something. Private transfer fees. No, 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 but there's a yes on seismic hazard zones. Well, that's one of the 6 that's in your NHD. So if it's a yes here, your NHD is a yes. I think what it's doing, though, is it's taking those 6, pulling them out of the NHD and making you do them individually. I don't like that. I'd rather do the NHD. It's one form, covers all of these things. Smoke detectors, no, but maybe. It all depends on if there's any residential 1 to 4 smoke detectors. And it talks about flood zones, yes. It talks about State Irresponsibility Act, yes. And those are on the NHD. So that's a matter of, I would have to say yes, even though it says you don't have to have the NHD farther up. It's saying the 6 things: 2 earth, 2 fire, 2 water, you must have. So, and I just go down this list, and this is what I would make sure that was included, unless your broker has something else that they want to include. Okay, we have a recording. Probably best to sign. Yeah, yep. Okay, good. And it's one of those things where I just can't. And wait a minute. Now, this is something that I didn't bring up. In residential, the last thing I want to have in the middle of a residential transaction is attorney. I don't want to hear that word. In commercial, my buyer says, I want to buy real estate. I say, terrific. Here's who I am. Here's what I'm going to do for you. Who's your real estate attorney? That's the first thing I ask them. They say, why? I say, because they're going to look over the forms and they're going to make sure that the forms are admissible in a court of law based on what they're used to. Not CAR. These are their own real estate attorneys. And then my next question is, who's your CPA? Why? Because they're going to make sure this fits into your portfolio. I'm not a tax person. I don't know if this is a benefit to you or not. So in a residential, I'm not asking those things. In a commercial, I always ask them. And if they say, oh, well, my divorce attorney will take care of this. No, you need a real estate attorney to make sure that they're going over these different facts and figures and forms. All right, water conservation, yes and no, and then the water bracing, water heaters, and then window bars. So these are put together again. This is the California Association of Realtors website. I went to standard forms. I went into what's called risk management, and I looked at what they refer to as the disclosure chart, sales disclosure chart. And it talks about residential, first 3 columns, apartments, this column, and then commercial and vacant and industrial land, this column. So personal property, this is your mobile homes. This is the actual publication, CAR publication, and the law. So this is put together by you, by legal staff. So make sure that you've looked this over, talked it over with your broker, or talked it over with your attorney at your particular, where you're doing business. And again, this is what's called Lone Wolf, Zip Forms Editions, Transactions Lone Wolf. This is the one that's online. This is the one I always use, but for class I use this particular one just because there's no advertising on it. And if the internet goes down, I'm still doing business. All right, let's make sure we got all questions answered, good, or comments. Now we did the agency disclosure. We went through that. You put in the name of your firm, you check off the appropriate boxes, put in the name of the firm representing the buyer, check off the boxes, and then potentially competing offers. Now, the potentially competing offers, this is a form that talks about you might represent the buyer and you might represent the seller. Well, let me see, yeah, doggone this thing. All right, back to this again, sorry. So the commercial purchase agreement is what we're going over. This is page 1 of it. We talked about the agency disclosure, checking off those boxes. I can always see when when the thing starts lighting up, it says chat. I know that I'm not on the right screen, so thank you for that. I appreciate that. The potentially competing offers. This is and just if you want to have some fun, go through this form and just count this CAR form. Just count those words. Just look for CAR form. Nothing after that, just CAR form. See how many CAR forms could possibly be attached to this offer. Over 50. So you can have 18 disclosures, I showed you. You could have 50 other addendums to this, or actually other forms that could be attached to this purchase agreement. So you have a 17-page purchase agreement. Then you have 50 more forms. Then you have all the disclosure. And they tell you, don't practice law. It's getting interesting out there. It really is. So potentially competing offers, I might be representing buyers on the same property. I might be representing more than one buyer. I might have several listings in the area. I might be a dual agent. Is that okay with you? And then the financing terms. Now, financing terms are a little bit different with commercial. And what they do with commercial is they start in with, hi, what are you buying? I'm buying a commercial building. Good. How many units? We've got 10 units. Great. We need the financial statement of the tenants. What? Well, that's who's going to be paying your mortgage payment, not you. You're going to collect the rents from the tenants and you're going to pay. So we want to make sure that the tenants are in good shape. And this is kind of interesting in COVID times, because we're seeing a lot of commercial office buildings that are going vacant because people are working from home. And the two things are happening. The owners of the businesses are saying, hey, they're doing okay at home and I don't have to pay for a building. And then there's the expense involved of travel back and forth. And the employees are all saying, hey, we'd rather stay at home. Lessens all the different things. So we're going to see some repurposing or some corrections in the commercial office buildings. So in a financing term, so how are you going to, the first thing is it says the buyer will deliver the deposit directly to escrow. They're either going to wire the funds or deliver. So we never touch the money. And I love this from this aspect. The number one reason agents lose their license in the state of California is trust fund handling. Well, if I don't touch it, then I can't get in trouble. And that's why I love the purchase agreements. They've been about 8 years now that we've had this in there, where no matter who, I don't touch it. It goes directly to, I'm not going to get in trouble for trust fund handling problems. Then it talks about the agent that they might give it to them. Some companies are old school, and I want to let you know something. This is the CR form. This is put together by the California Association of Realtors standard forms, just to make sure we're clear on how this works. This form, not this standard form, not who filled it in, but this standard form, who put this standard form together? Who wrote up this standard form? No, not attorneys. It was put together by realtors such as yourself. It is a group of volunteers, realtors who volunteer their time. They meet typically 4 times a year, and they're the ones that came up with all these forms. They then hand it to legal staff to make sure it's admissible in a court of law and covers all the legal aspects. Okay? So if you want to change these forms, or you think you can, there's better things, and I did this in the 80s, when the purchase agreement went from a 2-page form to a 4-page form, I said, nobody going to sign this damn thing. And I joined standard forms. It was like hitting my head against the wall. It felt so good when I quit, because here's what I figured out. Every time we lose a major lawsuit, it's good for another paragraph. And we can see how this thing has grown. And there's a new one coming out theoretically January of 2021, not 2021, 2022, December of 2021. I just talked to Neil Kalin, who is in charge of standard forms and REBS, and he has reiterated several times to me that we're not going to get any new forms, purchase agreement forms, until the end of next year. So we don't have to worry about changes on those. Let me see if I've got some chats here. Screen needs to change. Yeah, Forms Committee. Let me make sure I've got this. All right. Good. So when we're talking about the real estate purchase agreement from the California Association of Realtors, I want you to understand this was written up by realtors such as yourself, 1. 2, this form is for buyers. This is a buyer form. They say, well, what about the AIR form? All right, well, let's take a look at the AIR form. So if we come down here, I can do everything in this in Zip Forms Standard that I can do in Zip Forms Plus, or what they call Lone Wolf transactions. So I come down here, I do the drop-down box, and I go to AIR forms. So here's AIR forms alphabetically. So here's the commercial cover sheet. I can come down here, and down at the bottom is a standard agreement, escrow instructions for, let's see. And it says real estate purchase agreement, not residential. Well, let's see if we can bring one up here. Yeah, that's vacant land. See, this is the AIR form. And if you pay for these, you can have them in your Zip forms or in your Lone Wolf. It's about $199 a year. And the reason I bring this up is because sometimes you submit it on a CAR form, whoever the listing agent is sends it back to you saying, use an AIR form. So you need to know there's some significant differences here. The first difference is the CAR form is for the buyers. It's written for the buyers to protect the buyers. The AIR form is written to protect sellers. So this is non-residential. So this is the non-residential form. It is 11 pages. It includes the agency disclosure and some other things, and it always says you got to get an NHD or an environmental. Okay, so this is written for the sellers, protect the sellers. The CAR form was written to protect the buyers. So you just got to know those 2 different ones in there. Okay, so we're back here. Make sure I'm on the, I've got sharing the proper screen here. Good. Good. And moving on down. Let me answer a few questions. So we did our agency disclosure. We did our fraud, wire fraud. Make sure you have a VPN, and then we run our commercial. So we disclose who's going to represent whom, where the deposit's going. And as I told you, some old school Realtors will say, no, we want the buyer to give the deposit to the broker. At that moment in time, you have to have a place you write it down. You have to have a trust fund register. What did you do with the money? We took it, we held it for 3 days. Once the offer was accepted, we opened escrow, we released the money to the escrow. And then an increase for deposit. Let me make sure we've got all the questions answered here. All right, let's see. Yeah, forms committee, CAR form. So gave you a look at that. And we'll refer back to that a couple more times in the class, because there are some differences. When you receive an AIR form as the listing agent, there's some differences in the CAR form. So we're mainly covering the CAR form today, but I will tell you what the differences are. First one is AIR form is the seller form, CAR form is a buyer form. And so if there's an increase for deposit, now in the CAR form, there's the RID, increase for increased deposit. What we're talking about here is we're talking about commercial buildings. We're not talking about any residential in here. That's what we're talking about today. In my opinion, the receipt for increased deposit does not have any validity, because whatever deposit you put in there, if the buyer backs out with no contingencies, the seller can keep. On a residential deal, it says they can only keep 3% of the purchase price. Well, that has to be 1 to 4 residential units. It's under the civil code, 1 to 4 residential units, and it has to be owner occupied. Well, we're not talking 1 to 4 residential units. We're talking about commercial here, non-residential, and we're not talking about some place you can live. So it's not going to be owner occupied from that aspect. So when we talk about this increase for deposit, we want to know about it. And I've done this a lot of times where I've said, hi, at this moment in time, it's a $22 million property. We'll put in a $2 million deposit, and we'll increase it to $5 million once all our contingencies are gone. The seller says, wow, we love that. We got $5 million deposit in there. The buyer backs out, we get the for the buyer, so there's a lot of contingencies in here. Let me make sure I've answered, kept up. So dealing with buyers form, but then other companies say you need to use the AIR form. Exactly. So here's what happens. I write it up on a CAR form, and I get, you got to understand, the people who deal in commercial, it's still the wild, wild west. And they'll come back and tell you, oh, you wrote that up on a CAR form, you must be a rookie. Tell you what, why don't you turn the buyer over to me? I'll give you a referral fee. You'll get that. Or since you're using the CAR form, you know, the commission we advertised was 6%, but I'm only going to give you 2%. See, they're not they have no code of ethics that they adhere to. They're not members of the National Association of Realtors. Plus, they have no MLS rules and regs. So they can do anything they want. So you need to be ready for that. That's a little insight into this. All right, can both be mixed on one transaction? I'm going to say yes, but you'd either have one purchase agreement for commercial, AIR or CAR. You wouldn't have them both. You might have addendums, and there's over 100 standard forms just in CAR. There's 40 some odd in AIR. So as to picking out which ones to use, you need to look them over. And this is one of the things, you need to be knowledgeable in the area in which you deal. You need to look at these forms. You need to study these forms. You need to go through them a couple of times. Every time I go through these forms, I go, wait a minute, that wasn't in there the last time I looked at it. Yes, it was. I just didn't see it. There's so much stuff that we have to go through. And I always remember my father saying, Joel, go do this. And I said, well, you did it wrong. Okay, you got to do it again. He said, there's never enough time to do it right the first time, but always enough time to do it over. Do it right the first time. So read these things over. I send a lot of emails to the legal hotline. I can send emails to them. They sometimes will call you back, and they'll sometimes refer to your emails. And it's just simple little things like, when does this apply, or what is this for? And they can give you that information. So all cash offer, if they click off that button, what do we want to see? We want to see the money. Show me the money. If they don't click off that button, they're getting a loan. Great. So tell us what kind of financing you're going to get, because the problem is on a commercial deal, the financing is a lot different than a residential. They're not looking at the owner per se. They're looking at the tenants, because the tenants are going to make the monthly payments. And in the financing agreements in the trustee, there's an assignment of rents clause. So if the landlord stops making the payments, the owner of the building stops making the payments, the lender can go directly to the tenants and say, give me your money. So it's a little bit different when we talk about all cash or getting a loan. And you're not getting a percentage of a loan. It's not like I can get an 80% loan. You might. It's based on what will it debt service. So your financing is a little bit different. You need to sit down. If you're doing these on a consistent basis, you need to sit down with a lender who does these and say, hi, let's go to lunch. Let me understand how this works. And they're going to go over the NOI, net operating income, as to what it can finance. And then they'll put with that a cap rate, return to the investment. But what really, when we're looking into finance, is what will it debt service? So they give you, if it's $100,000 a month, you can't use the whole $100,000. You can only use 80% of it or 90% of it, and you must have a reserve for the balance of it. And then it's just in financing. I just want you to be a little bit aware that it's a little bit different than residential. You can get them pre-approved to a point, but again, they're not looking at the buyer, they're looking at the property to make the payments. You know, the richer the buyer is, the better, but they're looking at, if everything goes to poop, who are we going to get our money from? We're going to get it from the tenants. And that's why you have an assignment of rents clause. If there's a second loan involved, what the terms and conditions are of that, so everybody knows. Any additional financing terms, if there's any concessions, rebates, you know, you'd put those kinds of things in here, and then it automatically adds everything up. Everybody initials down here, and we're on to page 2. Verification of down payment and closing costs. So again, this is straight out of the residential. I want to verify you have the down payment and the closing costs. Well, if you've already been pre-approved, then we got to know, do you have the money? I'm to the point where I don't even deal with these guys unless they're pre-approved and they can show me the money. Why would I go and show them buildings they can't afford? Okay, are they going to scratch off lotto tickets and get it? Why would I show them houses they can't afford? Same. Appraisal contingency, if it's and it's going to be contingent on that. And I always hear this thing, well, Joel, the appraiser's not buying the property. I understand that, but that is the basis for security of the debt instrument. So that's why they have to have it in order to sell it to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. Now, commercial loans are not saleable to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac in their beginning. They will buy them once they have been seasoned, okay? But most of them are not going to get sold. The discounts are too big. So you have to find an insurance company, a $20 million insurance company or somebody else like that that's going to buy these kinds of loans or make these kinds of loans. So the appraisal is going to be one of those. And the appraisal is not going to be the $500, $600 appraisal that we think about. It'll probably be more along the lines of a couple $1,000 appraisal. A narrative appraisal is what we refer to it as, rather than just a letter appraisal or a three-page appraisal. And then that loan application, okay, you haven't applied for a loan. You got 3 days to do that, and you got 21 days in which to remove the loan contingency. Now, again, this is just straight out of the residential area. Under the NMLS, National Mortgage Licensing Service, it says if you want to get a loan on a 1 to 4 residential units, the federal law says it will take 21 days to do all the disclosures. Well, commercial loans are exempt from NMLS. You don't have to have an MLO, mortgage loan originator license, given to you by the Department of Real Estate in California. Anybody, if you have a broker's license, you can do mortgages on commercial. And when I talk commercial, I'm talking about office buildings, industrial buildings, those kinds of things, not apartments. We're not talking about apartments here today. No loan contingency. I love this one. We're not going to get a loan. Okay, good. You're not doing a loan contingency. Let me see the dadgum. Let me see the money. Okay, I'm representing the buyer. I'm not going to take them out and show them property. They're going to buy it all cash, and then I don't see the money. I want to see the money. Now, sometimes you'll get an attitude. Well, look me up on Wall Street, or look me up we got plenty of money. Okay, that's nice. But if you're making offers and you can't back that offer with this, you're going to go out and get a loan. You were just trying to see if you could get a better deal. Let me know about it. Let me go up here and take a look at see if we got some questions here. It says, do not require to be a member of NAR, but they are governed by the DRE. Absolutely. Department of Real Estate. You have to have a license, and it's under 10131 of the Business and Professions Code. I'm looking at a question here. And it's asking, do commercial, anytime you sell real property in the state of California, you remember when you got your license, only 2 types of property in California, real and personal. If it's not personal, it must be real. Good. So if you want to sell it, you have to have a license. It has to be issued by the Department of Real Estate. It's under 10131 of the Business and Professions Code for brokers, 10133 for salespeople. And if you ask a commercial pride some disclosures required under CAR charts, but they'll refuse. Of course they will, because they're not a member of the California Association of Realtors. However, CAR, we didn't get this, we didn't pull this stuff out of the sky. These are laws. So I just sent them a copy of the disclosure chart. I say, I'm not asking for these. This is law. Here's the law. Look it up yourself. Not me. This is what the law is. And if they refuse to do it, this comes back to a situation where in this purchase agreement, if you look at this purchase agreement, if you're using this purchase agreement, go back here to page 1. It talks about the agency disclosure. On paragraph 1E, it says right here, paragraph 1E. Make sure I've got that right up here. Good. It says, buyer and seller are referred to as the parties. Brokers are not parties to this agreement. If you're not a party to this agreement, you don't tell this. If I'm representing the buyer, you, the agent representing the seller, do not tell the buyer what to do. You're not a party to the contract. If you are a party to the contract, then you have to disclose that fact. It has to be up here, or it has to be on an RCSD, which says I'm a member of the corporation. And then if you are a member of the corporation, we need to have that information written down here, because that's additional financing terms. You're putting your financials on the line. If you're not doing that, you're in violation of real estate law. You must disclose anything that would materially affect whether the buyer, seller would sell. That's Easton versus Strasburger, 1984, codified in our civil code, 1986 with the TDS, and then lengthened with the, let me see, when was that? 1988 under the agency disclosure. So they can't, there's nothing, nobody's hiding anything anymore, and you're not buying the pig in the poke. Even in commercial, they have to disclose anything that would material fact. That's a material fact that was on the disclosures all the way across your standard disclosure chart. Yes, 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 yes. No exceptions, no asterisks. Okay. So loan contingencies, loan limits on any credits, buyer stated financing, and this is another one of those where they say, we're going to buy this $22 million property all cash. Good, show us the money. Oh, you got the money, good. Later on, they say, you know what, we're going to go get a loan. Well, the seller, in this particular contract, the seller does not have to cooperate with the buyer on any kind of financing other than what was disclosed. If you said you're buying it all cash, now you're getting a loan, I don't have to cooperate with you. This is what this contract says. The seller has no obligation to cooperate with the buyers up to financing other than what's disclosed in this. It says it in the residential, it says it here. Now, I told you this is the wild, wild west. They're gonna just run over you like a truck, and they're gonna say, that's a CAR form. That's, we're not going with that. We're dealing with this, and if we get financing, we get financing. If we don't, we don't. AIR is a little more lackadaisical. It'll say, you got to remove all your contingencies. If financing is one of those contingencies, you got to remove them all. If it takes you 6 months to remove them all, that's fine. Once you've removed them, you got 30 days to close. CAR form says we're going to close within this period of time. We have this many days we're going to close. What those amount of days are is all dependent on your experience or what you think for all the disclosures and things like that. The AIR form says, do all your disclosures, your 18 different disclosures. Once you're done with those, you give them to us, you give them to escrow, you now have 30 days to close the deal. Here, this says, oh, we're going to need 180 days or something. I don't know. Whatever I don't, this is one of those that's so in limbo. I can't even believe it because I can say 180 days and it might take 2 years. Commercial deals don't close like residential deals. They're very slow to close unless it's an exchange. So I've sold my property. I got to find my up leg. I got 45 days to identify and 180 days to close. Now is when you're going to see people jumping through hoops to make sure things are done. But I just want you to know, you can write 180 days in there. You better be clear that nothing's going to happen until all the contingencies are removed. So the 180 days is nice, or whatever amount of time, 270 days or whatever. It's a little bit different with the AIR form. We get through all of these contingencies, then you got 30 days. So addendums, if there's any addenda, and we always have the buyer's inspection advisory. It says, hey, buyer, you're buying this thing. You need to have some inspections done on it. That's just one of those. We lost the lawsuit on that one. So we have to make sure we have that disclosure, even on commercial transactions. If there's a trust or advisory, if there's other terms would be buyer is licensed. And if you look at the law that talks about this, it doesn't say where you're licensed. It just says if you have a real estate license. So buyer is a RE licensed agent. Okay. So that's where these kinds of things are. Or if you're related by blood or marriage to anybody in the transaction, to the buyer, to the agents, related by blood or marriage, those are where the other terms would go. And then we have allocation of costs. So what we're going to do is take a little break here, and we'll come back to allocation of costs. And again, if you look at the commercial, this one, and you look at the residential, it's very similar. Okay, but a lot of the stuff doesn't apply to a commercial sales transaction. So let's take about a 5-minute break here, get up, stretch, run around a little bit. Joel got to get some more Go Juice. Okay, everybody's drinking juice, so I got to have my Go Juice here, So let's take about a 5-minute break. I'll catch up on any of the questions that might be coming up here. Well, let me see. It's about 10 minutes after 2, so we'll see you at 10:15. Okay, we're still on break here, but I saw a couple of questions I'd like to get answered just right off the bat here. Um, if I submitted on a CAR form, I went to the buyer said, I want to buy a piece of property. We filled out the CAR form, I submit it to one of the big companies or another company. And they come back and they tell me, I want it written on a different form. Well, I'm not a party to the contract to go back to my buyer and say, they're refusing to look at it on this form. They want it on an AIR form, or they want to, there's several large commercial brokerages out there that have their own forms that they use. And if you want to do business with them, they require that you use their forms. Now, you can inform them they're not a party to the contract. They've already run that gamut. They say, oh no, this is what the seller wants. And they'll tell you, I want you to use the AIR form because it's a seller form. So they can tell you this. The seller couldn't really care less. They just want to sell the dadgum property. But when push comes to shove, these commercial brokers have, oh, I don't know how you say this, but they have prompted, or they have told the sellers, if I ask you this, you say that. And if I need you to write something, you write it for me. And they say, okay, fine. I just want to sell a property. And they want to be covered. And as I told you, I don't care what form you use. I don't care if you use the back of a matchbook cover. Once I'm finished writing the dadgum thing up, I take it and I give it to their attorney, the buyer's attorney. If I represent the seller's attorney. And I have them look it over. I'm not an attorney. I don't know if this is legally binding. So, you know, it's called risk management. You push the risk off on the people who are knowledgeable in the area in which you're dealing. And this is a commercial area, so you want to make sure that they're knowledgeable. You don't want the divorce attorney. You want the real estate attorney. Sometimes those are a little tougher to find. So if they say that, I'm not saying you don't have to. You're not a party to it. They're not a party to it, but they know how to cover their tracks and say, no, this comes from the seller. And if you tell them, well, I want the seller to write this and send it to me, two things will happen. Number one, they'll say, go take a flying leap at yourself. Or two, they'll write up something and send it to you. And you don't know if it was the seller or not. Okay. So I told you, this is a wild, wild west. They're still wearing 6-shooters on there. Okay. Oh yeah, it's $199 for AIR forms. You would just go to, boy, they always send you the bill in the beginning, like in December or January, and they say, hi, or actually now it's in March. Hi, you have these items with your zip forms or your lone wolf. Do you still want them? I say yes, and they just charge me the $199. And if you, well, let me see. Where do they have? Well, let's go to here. Let's go to lone wolf transactions. Yeah, I know I'm over the time period. That's all right. We'll go back here. Transaction center. We'll go into zip forms, lone wolf edition. And so that you can see this, because most of us use this. I'm just showing you in the class because it's easier. I don't have to go through all of the logins and all these other things, and it checks who I am, and then it shows all the deals that I got cooking. But if I do cook up a deal here, let's just take this deal right here. And I don't know why I want to see what forms are involved. If you come over here, there's a thing called all forms. So I'm on the zip forms, or what they call lone wolf transactions. This is online. This is, if you're not connected to the internet, you can't get on this. And you come over here to all forms, you click on all forms. It shows you your forms library. And under your forms library, you can do the drop-down box, and here's all the different items that are included in your forms library. So this particular one, it has AIR forms right up here. It has financing help. It even has EPUBs, and EPUBs are a big deal. You know, that's give you all your disclosures. You can just email it to them. And down here, it has there's the Orange County Association of Realtors and the San Francisco Association of Realtors. They have their own forms or disclosures. So take a look at some of these things and see. I'm going to say 80% of this does not apply to anything I do. I use Orange County forms. CAR forms, and AIR forms. The rest of these, I haven't even looked at them because they don't apply to what I do personally. Right? But take a look at them, see what they are. And then if you say, well, wait a minute, what about some other things? Well, you can click on this drop-down box right here by CAR, and it'll tell you, well, you can search a certain description, or you can go to all, click on the all. Here is COVID for lease, COVID for sale. They got 10 new forms now, standard forms have come up with. Here's commercial disclosure. So they have a whole sub list under California Association of Realtors that you can click on and look for this, or search for the different forms. So there's a lot of information in here, and oh, you're not seeing this, are you? Dadgummit. I hate Zoom. I apologize. Dadgum Zoom. All right, so this is what I'm looking at here. Jeez. So I go back to the list. These are the lists of this. I just logged on to, well, let me see if it shows it. Good. All right. So I logged on to the transactions I have going. This is Zip Forms, what they used to call Zip Forms Plus. It's now called Transactions by Lone Wolf. It's the Zip Forms edition. Shows all the deals you got going. So if you click on one of the deals, it brings up over here all forms. And that's what I'm talking about over here in the upper right-hand corner, all forms. If you click on all forms, it shows you all the forms you have in each of these different libraries. So the different libraries are, here's the AIR forms, here's EPUBs, ePublications for all the disclosures, lead-based paint, earthquake fault zones, things like that. Here's Orange County Realtors, and here's San Francisco Association of Realtors, the forms that they use. So they're all in here, and some of them cost, some of them don't. If you're interested in this, what I would do is just go up here to Lone Wolf, and I would contact them, something up here. And I'd say, hi, I'm interested in what these forms are. Can you tell me what they are? If they say, we don't do this, then it's done by REBS, Real Estate Business Services. And Real Estate Business Services is a subsidiary of the California Association of Realtors. And they are a for-profit. CAR is a not-for-profit. REBS is for profit. And if you go back here, those are the ones that put the advertising. They're selling this advertisement. REBS are selling this advertisement here because they take the money, then they give it to CAR to keep our dues down. So, okay, fine. All right, make sure we're sharing our screen here. Good. Okay, so this is what I use every day. I do not use the what's called Zip Forms Standard, and the reason is because I don't know if those forms are updated. These are updated every second of every day, every form in here. Whereas when I go down to, let's see if I can get out of here. When I go down to Zip Forms Standard, Zip Form Standard, this is only updated if I log in and do updates. As a matter of fact, before the class, I had a major update, and they always do those updates up there. All right, so let me look and make sure I've covered everything here. Screen, okay, yeah, it's $199. Okay, good. So let me make sure I'm back on the same screen I'm supposed to be on. Nope, I'm not. Okay. So this is the Zip Form Standard. I just use it for my classes, and the reason is because there's no advertising on it. I could blow it up. It's more user-friendly from that aspect. So any identified forms, let me see, we got any other questions here before I go on? Make sure I've answered those. 99. Not clear. Yeah, so I answered that one. Okay, good. All right. This is a good group. I like all these questions. And I'm going to tell you, if there's some of them I don't have a clue about, I tell you, you got to find out from some other aspect. I usually start with CAR Legal. I go talk to them first. And if they say we don't have a clue, then I'll go to standard forms, because standard forms are the ones that put these together. They got to have some background on it. So NHD, if that's included, any other, if you're going to have a phase 1, phase 2, It talks about government retrofit a lot of, and this if you residential, you look at residential, this is a lot of residential. In here, it talks about water retrofit. These are mandatory government requirements, and the one that we're talking about here is probably in LA, it's a 9A. For California, it's you got to have low flow showers, low flow commodes, low flow faucets. As of January 1st, 2019, all must have low flow showers, low flow commodes, low flow faucets, and it's not point of sale. So when you sell them, it's amazing to me. I close deals all the time, and people always check off, oh, the seller going to pay for, the buyer going to pay for, and they say, buyer, you want low flow? Yeah. Seller, you got low flow? Yeah. Does anybody check? No. And it closes, and none of them are low flow. But we don't have, but the problem is we don't have any inspectors going out and inspecting this stuff unless you have that specific request. 2, we don't have any water police yet. As soon as the water police come, they're going to check this stuff out. They're going to go door to door. Hi, we need to check and see if you have low flow showers, low flow commodes, low flow faucets. If you don't, you're going to have to put them in, or you're going to get fined, or they'll do it, or whatever. So just be ready for that one. Title and escrow. Check off the appropriate boxes. It's all negotiable between buyer and seller. and again, they're gonna, if you're dealing with a big house, somebody who's been in the commercial business a long time, and that's all they do, they're gonna run over you on these. They're gonna say, no, your buyer's to pay for that. Well, let the seller determine if the buyer's gonna pay for it. Okay, let's get it to them. And we come down here and it talks about notice. Now this is included or excluded. These become important items from this aspect. In the listing, it'll mention a few of those. If it is not mentioned in the purchase agreement, but it's mentioned in the listing, it's not part of this agreement. And CAR forms are very succinct about this. AIR forms, you're going to have a separate attached list of equipment that's included. So if you're buying an industrial building and there's equipment that's included, the spray booth or whatever, you're going to have that list. It's going to have the serial numbers on it and all sorts of things like that. So a little bit different. This is talking about a commercial, probably a commercial building where you're not residential. This is non-residential is what we're talking about. Items included or excluded. So it's got all of these different items in here. And if you look at these, there's a lot of this doesn't even apply to commercial. So what they did is they took the residential stuff, they just threw it in here and said, you got any problem with this, just cross it out. Now that's another thing. In this particular form, you don't cross out anything. It doesn't even have the ability to do that. In the AIR forms, I can cross out whole paragraphs. I just cross them out. And that's perfectly okay. And when you talk to the attorneys at AIR, that's the American Industrial Realtors, they say, oh yeah, you can cross that out. And so there's a few, we don't touch the forms at CAR. AIR, they'll cross out whole paragraphs, non-applicable, NA. Nobody has to initial it or anything. You don't do that with CAR forms because it nullifies the form, and CAR will not come back to cover you on that. Then it talks about leased or liened items. So if there's any solar system seems to be a big deal. I guess Tesla was coming out with a new announcement of a battery today at 1 o'clock. I don't know what happened, but it was the talk in the whole town. If they've got this battery that lasts 3,000 years, and then they can change the industry. Okay. So any leased or liened items, the reason I bring this up is because the last deal I did, the solar company was bought by Tesla. And so they're providing the solar now. So items that are excluded from the sale, put them in here. Even if you've written them down, even if they're in the listing, even if they're on the flyers, you always want to write it down in here. Because if it's not written on this agreement, it is not included in this. It's not excluded or included unless it's here. Anything else, automated phone systems, passwords, codes, got to go with the property, especially if it's a smart building. We're getting more and more smart buildings. You've got to have those codes. You've got to understand it's basically a 2-day course for your building manager to understand how to work all these different passwords, permissions, and how they apply the software and how they update, things like that. Closing in possession. So it's seller occupied property. It talks about it's going to be at the 6 o'clock in the day of recording. Now they talk about the seller to remain in possession. Again, this was decided by standard forms for residential, but you could still have the seller stays in there until they can pack up and move. You're not going to get a lot of positive responses from other commercial agents that's all they do on this. If you say, oh, the seller wants to stay there for 3 days after the close of escrow, well, then they're going to sign a rental agreement. And it's going to be not the one we use, the SIP, seller in possession. It's going to be a rental agreement, because under rental laws, a little bit different. Residential rental laws are a little bit different than commercial rental laws, because you're not living there. So the idea is, this is my home, this is my apartment, I live here, you're kicking me out. It makes it a little more complicated. This is my office, this is my business. Hey, you didn't pay your payments, you're gone. Unlawful detainer actions, never had any trouble with the judge saying, you're out of here. So you want to make sure there's a good commercial lease agreement if they're going to stay there afterwards. Typically, they're not staying there afterwards, they're gone, deal closes. It either is, we're going to accept the tenants that are already in there, or we're going to move in, we're kicking the tenants out and we're moving in ourselves because we want the building. It's not an investment property, it's an owner user. The security deposits. Security deposits are a big deal. And I've had commercial property management where I've had $50,000 sitting in my trust account under 101.45 of the Business and Professions Code, that once the building sells, that $50,000 goes to the new buyer because it's tenants' deposits. And when the tenant moves out, they're going to expect their deposit back. So that's what they're talking about in security deposits. It's a big deal for commercial, especially if it's property managed. Seller, natural disclosure, and environmental hazards. So it talks about environmental hazards, and it talks about the 6 required by law. This is under 1102 of the Civil Code. 1102 of the Civil Code says you must disclose these additional items. We get in an HD, it includes these items, plus a litany of other items, about 9 or 10 other items in there. If there's any other additional that they want to make sure that this is taken care of, and those additional items, they will put that in there. So any additional disclosures specified in 18. So now I'm like, wait a minute, this is one of those road maps. You go to point B, from point B you go to point C. Well, wait a minute, where's point C? Well, point C is at 18. So then you have to come down here to point C to find out what they're talking about as far as that goes. So 18 has to do with the time periods for removal. And these time periods, you'll notice they're the same as residential. Well, in commercial, that's a whole different kettle of fish. You're not going to find situations where they're going to be able to get these things all done in a 7 or 14 or 17-day period of time. Unless it's, I'm part of an exchange and I got to identify in 45, close in 180. Then we'll put some more, we'll have people dance a little bit faster. But sometimes these things in here, and I always ask the buyer, you have all these things you could do. You going to do these things? The buyer says, I don't even know what you're talking about. Well, then I'm going to have to do them or it ain't going to close. If I'm going to have to do them, I need more than 17 days. So I got to have permission from the buyer to say, are you going to do them? No. And if I'm going to do them, I need 45 days to do them. Oh, okay, put it in 45. Now, I'm not part of the contract. So if I take that on, do I take on more liability? Yes. But it's not going to close. The whole idea is not to do an exercise here and then have it fall out. The whole idea is to get what's necessary to close, get it closed, get the commission. That's all. You're all in this for the commissions, right? Oh, no. I got into real estate because I want to help people. Yeah, right. You got in the real estate business because you want to make a lot of money, but here's what you're going to find out. The money doesn't come unless you give the service. Understanding your contracts is the service, okay? Let me make sure. Every time I see something come up, I want to make sure I'm sharing my screen property. And let's see what it says here. Estoppel. Oh, okay. Estoppel clarify. Yeah. Yeah, that's one of those deals. Here's what happens. I buy a commercial building. I'm going to leave the tenants in there. I'm an investor. I got tenants in there. Leave the tenants in there. The tenants say they're paying this amount of rent and have this amount of deposit. Well, I hear what they say. I watch what they do. I want an estoppel. An estoppel says this: hi, tenant, here's how much rent you're paying. It's in writing. Here's how much deposit you're paying. These are the terms of your rental agreement. Do you agree with this? Yes. Sign here. Now, when they come back and say, oh, my deposit was more than that. I gave you this. It said, here's what your rent is, here's what your deposit is, and you signed it. This is an estoppel. You are now estopped for claiming more. So that's what an estoppel does. Yeah, sometimes we use words, and that's always amazing to me. And we just run over these words, and then people go, oh, okay. Not knowing what the words are, not knowing what the acronym stands for, but they don't want to ask. Please, I always ask, wait. What does that mean? So that I can get a better understanding of what this form is saying. So thank you for bringing that up. Then we come down here, time periods of the essence. You got 5 days, contingency removals. Again, this is a buyer form. So a lot of this is for the buyer. And they talk about the request for repairs. So if there's any repairs that have to be done. And again, this is a contingency. These repairs have to be done. Buyer agrees to it, seller agrees to it. We're not going to close escrow until they're done. And we have the statements that they've been done and that they've been paid, so there's no mechanics liens against the property. And these contingencies continue. You look at this form, it's very similar to the RPA, Residential Purchase Agreement. And the reality is the continuation of contingencies will be eliminated in writing after all the contingencies or after all the inspections have been done. I want to inspect the books. I want to inspect this. I want to inspect that. I have a lot of contingencies in here, especially in the AIR form. There's a whole page of things that have to be done before we even start thinking about closing escrow. Same thing here. So the buyer's right to cancel, seller's right to cancel, and what happens to the deposit when they have. So we have the notice of buyer to perform, the notice of seller to perform. We don't have, there's nothing like that in the AIR forms. They're just going to send you something that says, and by the way, that brings up another point. This particular form is an active contract. The CAA form is an active contract. The buyer says, I want this fixed. The seller is required to say, no, I'm not going to fix it. If the buyer says, I want this fixed, and the seller says nothing in this contract, then the seller's going to fix it. So the buyer says, hey, I want this fixed. I got an RR here, a request for repairs. I want this fixed. And the seller says, I'm not going to fix it. Then the buyer says, yes, I'll close, or no, I won't. I'll back out. So that's an active form. The AIR form is a passive form. And basically it says, buyer, you got to do these things. If the buyer says, no, I'm not going to do them, now it comes back to the seller. Seller says, you got to do these things. Buyer doesn't say anything. It's presumed the buyer's going to do them. So that's a passive form. Nobody has to react. Buyer says, I want these things fixed. Seller says, it ain't getting fixed. So there's a little bit of difference there in philosophies as to how things are going to be done. The effect of the personal removal of contingencies. So the buyer's removal of contingencies, it says, buyer, if you remove all your contingencies, you have completed all your investigations. You elect to proceed and you assume all liability and responsibility. So when all those are removed, and we want to get those removed as fast as possible, you can't come back and say, oh, well, I found out something about the property, I don't want to buy it. No, you've removed all your contingencies. And there's a checkbox that says up front, you can remove them all with the offer. I've never seen a commercial deal where they removed all the contingencies with the offer because there's too much money to be lost. It's the proverbial pig in a poke, if you will. And we talked about close of escrow, we got 3 days. And then it talks about effective cancellation on the deposits. Now, again, this is in the CAR form. You ain't going to find this in the AIR form. The first sentence is here. Buyer says, I don't want to buy. Seller says, I don't want to sell. Good. Both signed cancellation instructions were done. This one goes on to say that if in fact, just like this residential, if in fact one party makes a written demand to escrow for the deposit, then escrow will contact the other party. If the other party does not respond within 10 days, then escrow will release the deposit to them. Commercial snowballs chance, and you know where ain't nobody releasing nothing to nobody about nothing. So they're probably, if you submitted this to a commercial guy, he would look at this paragraph, he'd go, what? He'd cross it out. Because, you know, if he's not a member of CAR, not knowing he can't cross it out, he just cross it out. He put in some kind of program where he said, no, we're not doing this. And I would always love to say, I didn't know you were one of the sellers. But that just aggravates them. You know, we're trying to close a deal here, and they've been running ripshod over most people all their life. And so they just keep it up. And you're going to, every once in a while, and I prefer the AIR forms, but I will use CAR forms just from the aspect of, I know our attorneys at CAR have looked these over. And if you say, I don't like something about the form, if the buyer and seller have signed the form and they say, we're going to sue you based on the form, not the minutia that you've added to it, but the actual printed form, they're going to defend that form. Whereas AIR says, well, no, that's your own problem. You could make changes to it and adjust it any way you want. And Mashian, who's the attorney at AIR, you know, he's very clear about that. He'll be happy to defend you and charge you money, but now if you made the changes, that's up to you. That's why we don't make any changes, and they would look at this and say, no, we're not going for this deal. If the buyer disappears, you know, we'll figure out something else to do, but we're not going to give one party the right. It took two parties to get in. We're going to give one party the right to get out. No, we're not going for that. No, we're at bottom page 6, and we got repairs. And I talked about these repairs. I just had a situation last year where we had those rainstorms, boom. And we were in escrow on one of the deals, and the roof leaked a little bit. And the guy said, oh, well, I've repaired the roof. Well, the buyer said, okay, I want to see, first of all, I want to see that you have repaired, the repairs were performed, and then I want to see that you paid. I want to see receipts. So I know you paid for it, so we don't have a mechanics lien after we close the deal. We put them in the escrow and it was all done. They have the same thing in here. So this is, but again, any change in the structure of the building, automatically you're out of it. You do not have to keep messing with this. Let me make sure I'm on the right. Okay, good. Verification of conditions, and this says this is not a contingency of sale. A lot of times people think, well, I got that 5 day prior to, and if I don't like it, I can back out. No, it's not a contingency in this form. In the AR form, it is a contingency. You have to be happy with the property or you ain't buying it. In this form, it says, nope, not a contingency. So you have to be careful of that. That's why you want to make sure that it's a happy situation and that the tenants are not moving out, making problems for you, or that the seller's moving out of the building and mad about the transaction. And there's all, you know, everybody's has attorneys and everybody is sue happy. So one of the things that I found out is, how many of you like to go to court and lose? Nobody wants to go to court and lose. How many want to go to court and win? How many don't want to go to court? That's what I'm talking about here. So if you explain this properly to the buyers and you make sure that they understand what's going on here, and then it's conveyed to the sellers in the same method, and then the attorneys have looked it all over. Remember, I always have a commercial deal. I want their attorneys to look it over. And I don't say, I want your attorney to approve it. I always say, I want your attorney to disapprove. Because the attorneys will never disapprove anything. They won't approve it either, but they won't disapprove it. So put them into that. They may give you some rhetoric that they'll want put in there or something else. They want to earn their fees. Proration of property taxes, again, this is taken care of by escrow. You just have to make sure that your buyer understands. And I've had this a few times where I've had buyers from other states come to California. And when we say, this is what the property taxes are now, they go, okay, I can pay those. When it closes, they're going to automatically be upped to Prop 13. And we've got a proposition coming up here in November that's going to split roll. And that means commercial buildings are going to be taxed at a different rate, no more Prop 13. So we better be careful of that, because in my opinion, that's a foot in the door to getting rid of Prop 13. Most states, they don't have limits like that, and they can charge anything they want, and the legislatures can have all the money that they want to play with, and it's very costly. So we got to be careful of that, in my opinion. Then compensation. We get down to my favorite part here. It says, we're in this for the compensation. That's the only reason the brokers are involved in this. And the brokerage doesn't tell you what to do or what to say or how much to pay or anything. So don't say, the broker said. It says right here. If you have a question about the price, if you have a question about this inspection, you, buyer, are responsible. Seller, if you want to know if there's a tax ramifications, you were instructed to go talk to your tax person, not the broker. Okay. And then the scope of duties. So my scope of duties, I don't decide what the buyer will pay or the seller will take. I don't guarantee the condition of the property. I don't guarantee the performance of any of these inspectors' adequacy. And I'm not going to be responsible for any public records. This is, if you're concerned about that buyer, you need to go to the title company. You need to go to the insurance company. You need to go to and I always shift the risk to those people who are knowledgeable in the area in which you're dealing. And we always do this in a real estate transaction. We shift it to those people who are knowledgeable, the insurance company, the title company, the mortgage company, the inspection companies. But this is just a reiteration of the fact I am in it for the compensation. I'm going to explain the forms and what the process is. I do not guarantee the square footage. I don't know anything about the promotional materials. And I'm not going to be responsible for providing advice on taxes or law. It says right here, not for taxes or for the law. So I make sure they're real clear on that. And then remember, I was telling you about the representative capacity. If one or more of the parties is different than the name at the first page was ABC Incorporated, at the bottom of this page, the signature page, it is Joel Carlson, president. Well, then I'm going to need something from the entity that says who the heck you are. It's an LLC. Good, then I need formation documents to show who can sign on the behalf of the business entity. It's a corporation. Then I need a resolution. See, in the state of California, corporations are run by the board of directors, and I need a resolution from the board of directors that says you can sign on the behalf of the board of directors. Now, I tell you, reality check, I don't care. Who cares? Escrow, title. They're not going to issue title without this. If it's a court order, if it's a trust, if it's an attorney, I got to see copies of this, because the title company is not going to insure title without knowing the person who signed it has the ability or right to do so. And then escrow instructions. This always amazes them. This, if I go back here to page, let me see, on page 7 here. If I go back to page 1, on page 1, this is a real estate purchase agreement, escrow instructions. These are the escrow instructions. If somebody says, well, I want to open escrow, you don't have to. You already have escrow instructions here. But remember when you got your real estate license? What must you escrow in the state of California? Liquor license. You don't have to escrow anything else but liquor license. So this doesn't have to go through escrow. These are the escrow instructions. Now, I always tell them, if you don't want to use escrow, you don't want to use my company, because escrow does too many things to protect me and the buyers and sellers. So if we come back here, page 7, and we're looking at the escrow, these are the items that are included. And they are paragraphs 1. Wait a minute, what happened to paragraph 2? Paragraph 2, there's no paragraph 2 in there. That's because paragraph 2 is not part of this contract. Paragraph 2 is a restatement of disclose, elect, and confirm. Remember we started out with that? You must give them the agency disclosure form once you form more than a casual relationship. Then you have to find out from your broker which boxes to check off. You check off those boxes on page 1. Do you represent the buyer exclusively, seller exclusively, or both buyer and seller? And then you confirm it. And the confirmation is so important. It is a signature page on page 11 of this contract. So you're not a party to the contract. That means you're not, number 2 doesn't go in here. And so these are the things that are included in the contract. Excuse me, in the escrow instructions. Now the escrow instructions, they're going to write up their own escrow instructions, get them sent out, making sure that they've covered their, have you ever looked at the escrow instructions you get now? It's a restatement of what's on about 1 page of what's on this purchase agreement. And then it's about 5 pages of the escrow company's not responsible for nobody about nothing. Have you looked at those? You need to read some of this stuff. Okay, have a nice bottle of Chardonnay and go through some of this stuff. This is a copy of this agreement. Now this is under law of copy. Law of copy says everybody got a copy of it. We do this by digital link. We do this by DocuSign or biometrics. However you're doing it, it's fine. That is law under the 2000 Global Signature Act. So, but you got to have a copy of it. So if I sign with my email address, I got to have an email address that comes back and says, hi, you signed it on this date at this time with your email address. And they have what they call an audit form under zip forms. It's actually under Lone Wolf, but I just sent an audit form, and it's for a 3-page document. It was 124 pages. That was the audit. That this guy, we sent it to him. He signed it digitally. It came back, those 3 pages, to verify that in a court of law. Let's call it a judicial audit. It was 124 pages. Getting interesting out there. The brokers are party to this escrow for the sole purpose of compensation. That's the only reason I'm in this deal. So here's what happens. We go into escrow. Everybody is happy. Everybody's in love. Everybody. And as it goes along, the seller starts getting mad, starts getting more mad. And after a while, they call up escrow and they say, hey, don't pay Joel. This is my favorite paragraph because it says the buyer and seller have irrevocably assigned the broker's compensation. That means when they call up and say, don't pay Joel, escrow says, I have to. You have signed this contract and it's irrevocable. Now in the AIR form, it's a little bit different. It's going to refer back to the listing agreement, but they actually put it in the AIR form. Here's how much money the agents are making, and here's how it's split, so that there's no discussion. It's right in there. We come on down here to remedies for breach. Now again, I was telling you earlier, in residential, you have a 3%. Well, there's no 3% in here. So if you sign the liquidated damages, if the buyer and seller sign the liquidated damages, here's what they're saying. Buyer and seller. If the buyer fails to complete said purchase buyer's default, the seller shall retain his liquidated damages deposit actually paid. That's what we're saying. We're not going to sue each other. We're not going to arbitration. You're just going to keep the deposit. And it goes on and it talks about buyer and seller agree that the amount is a reasonable sum, whatever reasonable is, and it's impractical and very difficult to establish damages in a court of law. So we're going to release the funds required by mutual consent. At the time of any increased deposit, the seller shall sign a separate liquidated damages agreement incorporating increase for deposits. Now, this is the RID. The RID is to protect you to the 3%. However, there might be a stipulation in your contract someplace that says, I'm giving out of the $22 million project, I'm giving you a $2 million deposit, and I'm going to up it to $5 million. Well, that other $3 million probably has some contingencies in this contract. So you need an RID to say, hi, if I back out, you get the $2 million. However, that other $3 million, I as the buyer get back. Okay. Normally that would be under an RID, receipt for increased deposit, to make sure that there's no more than 3% on the sale of 1 to 4 residential units. And we can see a lot of similarities in this, but it doesn't say anything about 1 to 4 residential units in here because this is commercial. That means it's not residential. Okay. Then mediation. If they do not initial the mediation clause, must they mediate? If they don't initial mediation, must they mediate? Yes. There's no place to initial. And it says right here, this mediation provision applies whether or not the arbitration provision is initialed. See how Joel fooled you? If the buyer and seller sign this form, they've agreed to mediate. AIR, a little bit different there. We ain't mediation. We're going to take the gloves and we're going to get to it. We're going to go arbitration or litigation. Or we might do some mediation, but we're going to have to back out of the arbitration litigation situation. So in this particular, here's what I'm saying. This particular situation, if they sign this contract, they've agreed to mediate. And mediation is probably nothing more than a clarity as to where they're going with this contract. Here's what happens. The buyer says to their buyer's agent, I want this. The buyer's agent calls the seller's agent and says, the buyer wants this. The seller's agent says to the seller, the buyer is demanding these items. What happened? It was a miscommunication. So in the mediation, what we do is we find out, what did the buyer want? What did the seller hear? And we clarify that. Once we've clarified that, we close the deal. If it goes to arbitration, and it says that it excludes some provisions in number 26. So this basically says, if you, buyer or seller, refuse to mediate, you will not mediate, then the prevailing party shall not be entitled to attorney's fees. So you say, hi, we're in this contract. I know it says we're going to mediate, but we're not going to mediate. I'm going straight to court. I'm going to sue you. The buyer says, I'm going to court. I'm going to sue. The buyer goes to court and the buyer wins. The buyer goes, I won. No, you didn't, bonehead. Because paragraph 26 says, go down to 26 here, the prevailing party in this instance, number 26C, it says there's exclusions that if you refuse to mediate, you are not entitled to attorney's fees. What? So if you refuse to mediate, you've agreed, buyer, to mediate. If you refuse to mediate, it says the party shall not be entitled to recover attorney's fees. So if you win in court, buyer, you're not going to get your attorney's fees. That's about 60% of the judgment. I don't know about you, but I don't want to get into that circumstance. So you need to be knowledgeable in the area in which you deal, and that means you have to be cognizant of some of the things that are in these forms. Arbitration of disputes, they got to initial this. And I always get this, hey, Joel, should I have my people initial this? I don't know, I'm not party to the contract. Remember, it says I'm not a party. As a matter of fact, disclose, elect, and confirm. That's your agency disclosure. You gave them the agency disclosure form once you form more in a casual relationship. You found out from your broker which boxes to check off. You checked off those boxes on page 1, and then you come down here to the last page right down here, and you as the agent sign the contract. It says right here, presentation of offers, and you as the agent sign the contract. So here's my question to you. If you sign the contract, are you a party to the contract? If you saw the buyer signed, seller signed, communicated acceptance back, valid binding offer in the state of California, go into escrow, you've signed this contract. Are you a party to the contract? It says right here, real estate brokers are not parties to this agreement. It's right above your signature and we don't see it. You're not a party to the contract. So with that in mind, when we start talking about you're telling the buyer to do this, you're telling the seller to do this, this contract says you're not to do that. And if we come back up here to page 1, on page 1 of the purchase agreement, I already showed you this. Page 1 of the purchase agreement. Buyer and seller are parties. Brokers not parties to the agreement. We still don't see it. You're not a party to this transaction. You're not to be telling them what to do. Now, you know as well as I do, if you don't tell them what to do, nothing will get done. But you got to do it in such a manner as it's their idea. Don't you think that would be a good idea, buyer? Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea. Great, let's do it this way. Hi, seller, this is what we should do. So they always ask me, should they mediate or arbitrate? Make sure we got our screen up here proper. Good. And I say, I don't know, but buyer, seller, here's the front page of the on the website. There's websites. There's two websites. One website is the American Arbitration Association. Tells you all the reasons you should arbitrate. The other website is the California Trial Lawyers Association. It tells you all the reasons you should litigate. You pick. I'm not a party to the contract. So that's how I have handled that particular item. Let's see, we're sharing our screen. Good. And we'll answer, got a couple of chats here. Yes. Okay, yes. All right, good. Good. So I've answered all those. Then we come down here, we go on to the next. We're only on page 8. This is 8 of 11. Okay. Then we come down here to additional mediation terms and qualities. It says you might go to court even though you should be mediating. Well, there's certain exceptions to this in situations. You might be able to have a court situation but still be able to mediate or arbitrate, even though it's in court. Gives you some exceptions up here. A selection of services. Brokers don't guarantee any of these services. Don't. If they say, well, who do you suggest I use? I suggest you use these people. They use them and it doesn't turn out right. They go, I'm going to hold you liable. Now, this says they're not going to. They will anyway. So what I basically want you to do is if you're going to make recommendations, you're standing behind that recommendation with your license and your assets. So either you say yes, you either know who these people are, and I've been in the business long enough to know I know who's good and I know who's bad. And I'm not going to make a recommendation to somebody who's not going to do the job. And a lot of these people, when I make a recommendation, I'll stand behind them with my license. That's how well I know them. But if you do that, just remember, you can lose it. And the court case. Multiple listing, we're going to put it in there or some data system so that we know what the comparables are, how this sold. So when we list another piece of property, here's what it was sold for. Now, commercial's a little bit different because it doesn't matter what the comps are from an aspect of what it's sold for. It matters what the rate of return is. I take $22 million, I buy this property all cash. I get a 5% return on my money. Just from the NOI, forget cash on cash or any of that, just return on my investment. At a 5% return, then if there's a similar building built about the same time, same kind of tenants, then that probably should be its rate of return also. We call that a cap rate or capitalization rate. If I had $22 million and I invested in diamonds, I'd get this rate of return. I invested in paintings, I get this rate of return. I invested in real estate, I get this rate of return. It's based on the fact that there are no loans on the property. I took $22 million and I bought the property all cash. And that's where they come up with these rates of return. So we need to know those kinds of things when we're getting our comparables out there. What is the cap rate in the area? The attorney's fees, it says any action proceeding out of this, except paragraph 28A. If you refuse to mediate, you're not entitled to attorney's fees. Assignment, it says the buyer and seller shall not assign without permission of the other. So the buyer says, you know what, I don't want to buy this property anymore. I'm going to assign it to this guy over here. Seller says, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm not going to allow you to assign it to anybody because I don't know who these people are. You know what, I'm always puzzled by that because the buyer made an offer, signed the contract, and the buyer showed him I have the money. If I assign it to somebody and they sign the contract and they show they have the money, you know as much about them as you do about me. Okay, so that doesn't hold up. It basically says, unless otherwise agreed to in writing, you cannot unreasonably withhold. So if I want to assign it to somebody and they can sign it and they can show they can buy it, then I can assign it to them. You cannot unreasonably withhold that in this contract. It's CAR contract also. Cap rate. Higher cap rate is better for the buyer or, well, the cap rate is a return on your investment. So the higher the return on your investment, the better for the buyer. The higher the cap rate though, the lower the purchase price. So you say, I want to make 10% return on my money. I want a cap rate of 10. No properties is not, there's nothing in Southern California that is not totally too risky at 10% return. So you're looking at about 4 to 5% return on your investment in California. Net lease properties, commercial, all of those. So that's what we're looking at here is the cap rate, capitalization rate. It is a return on your investment. And if you put out $22 million, you get a 5% return. You're going to get this amount every year. 5% of the 22 million. If you put it in diamonds, if you put it in this, if you put it, there's more risk in certain things. We're just talking about real estate. We use those as comparables. Then it talks about assessors and assigns. Now, this is kind of different here. This says, I've got a deal going with you in this corporation. The president of the corporation dies. You're still going to close the deal. Okay, you just elect a new president because it was the board of directors who assigned that, and the board of directors are the ones buying the property. So this agreement shall be binding upon, and it says this in the AIR form also, and the assessors are form. So anything that we've got in here, one of them passes away, their heirs or assigns must close the transaction. All right, let me see. We had a comment or question. Chat, let me see what that says. Okay. The purchase sales agreement. Now see, whenever I see PSA, that's a purchase sale agreement. I know it's coming from a commercial. Nobody refers to a purchase sale agreement except commercial guys. So apparently LAP is a commercial guy. Are you saying the buyer's agents shall not look for permits or verify or signed off when finding or occupancy permits? What's it say in the agreement? If the agreement says I'm going to look for these things, then I look for those things. Now, you know as well as I do, there's certain things in here I'm going to tell, this is the responsibility of the seller. This is the responsibility of the buyer. And they go, I'm not doing it. Well, if they don't do it, it ain't going to get done. I'm not going to get paid. So sometimes I'll take on that responsibility and I will go and find out. I'm not going to find out the permits and things like that unless it's a purchase situation, and I'm going to put that off on somebody who is a contractor who knows that area. However, is this a permitted addition? That's going to be done by the appraiser. See, I want to shift the risk to those people who are knowledgeable in the area in which I deal. But if we can't find out, we're not having an appraisal yet, and we don't have somebody else who's a contractor. If I've got to do it, then I need to be knowledgeable in that area. If I take on that responsibility and I mess up, who's going to get sued and who's going to lose? Look in the mirror. It says, what if the buyer didn't do it and later finds out the building is illegally built? Well, did we have an appraisal done? If we had an appraisal done, we push that back on the appraisers. You bought it all cash, no appraisal, then you push that back onto the accountant. And if they say, no, the accountant's not going to do this, they're not looking at zoning and things like that, then it comes back on you. Because they're going to say you need to be knowledgeable in the area in which you're dealing. If you're dealing with commercial properties and you don't know to go and look at the county recorder's office to see what's recorded there and whether or not it's zoned properly, then you're the one that's going to be held liable. That's why there's a lot more liability in a commercial deal than there is in a residential. Because we've got so many disclosures in the residential, we pushed all the risk off of us. So environmental hazards, in consultation, again, federal and state law, this is federal law, it's under the Superfund. Superfund says you're probably going to need to have a phase 1 done. $1,500 to $2,500, it takes within a 1 mile radius of the property and sees, has there been any toxic waste problems? If there has been, then they might require a phase 2. And there's plenty of court cases out there where the lenders made a loan on the property, they found toxic waste. The buyer said, I can't pay for this toxic waste. They went back to the lender and said, you have to pay for it. So that's why the lenders are always requiring that you have at least a phase 1 done, maybe phase 2. And if there's any problems, phase 3, you got to mitigate, you got to fix whatever it is. So it's a little bit different. And that's why when I started in on this, I heard about the phase 1, phase 2. I called up a guy, I said, what is this? The people who do these kinds of things. And we went and had lunch and he explained them all to me. I still didn't understand them, but as I went along, I got better at it. So these hazardous, the federal law says any toxic waste have to be cleaned up by the owner or in the lane chain of title. That's why they go back. If it was a foreclosure, they come to the bank. Bank's got to pay for it. Discovery, location, evacuation for any of the risk provided. So we're going to get phase one probably done. And then we got Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, again, in residential property, we have to be cognizant of this, but it's not as pronounced as in the commercial building. I have curb cuts. I got to put out the parking. I got to make sure that the egress and ingress from the bathrooms, handholds, things like that. So the Americans with Disabilities Act is a big deal. I won't even work with a piece of property unless I have somebody who's a specialist in ADA. They come in and they make sure it's ADA compliant and they give that report to the buyer. I don't want them coming back and saying, hey, it's not ADA compliant. We now have a lawsuit against us. It's your fault, Joel. I push the risk on the people who are knowledgeable in the area in which they're dealing. Let me make sure I've got my screen on here. Well, the cap, there's a question here. How relevant are cap rates? It's just a return on investment. So how relevant is it? Well, I've got buyers that I've worked with that buy properties based on this one's mine. I had a transaction on one Rockefeller Center in New York City. They were selling one half of it. Actually, they were selling 49% because the PRC wanted to keep the other 51%. So they're selling 49%, and it's a fire property, finance, insurance, real estate. That's who the tenants are in there. So it was a good property, and it was well established, and they wanted to make sure that it was a good investment. They were looking at pride. I own 49% of one Rockefeller Center. They didn't care what the return was. Basically, it was $335 million. So they just were taking money and placing it someplace. And they know that placing money in the United States is probably a lot safer than placing money in some of the foreign countries that are out there making, putting transactions together. So that was one of those situations. All right. So as far as a return on investment, most people are going to say, I've got this amount of money, I want this return. The lower the return they get, the more theoretically safer the investment is. So as a cap rate goes, I say, I'll buy your property for this. Well, the seller says, that's nice. I'm not buying it. I'm not selling it for that. I want a larger return on my investment. So that reduces your capitalization rate, your rate of income, or your return on your investment. And there's a whole class on this. This cap rate stuff. CCIM goes over this. It's a big deal to some people. Some people want an internal rate of return. Some people want a different ways in which they look at after cash tax flow. There's all sorts of different things. And that's why I always get a tax person involved, because the return on the investment is different after taxes than it is just from a cap rate. A cap rate is just, it's a way to find out the playing field. It doesn't work for every person. You have to find out specifically what their needs and desires are. That's why I say you need to talk to your attorney about this form, and you need to talk to your tax person to make sure this is a good investment for you. Not me. I don't know if it's a good investment or not. I'll tell you what the facts and figures are. You have to figure that out based on the information you receive from your professionals. Then copies. Now this is interesting. You don't have this in your residential. It says they have each received copies of reports, documents, certifications, to be furnished true, unaltered. So every time there's something done, we're going to get a copy of it. Now in the residential, we're going to order different kinds of things that are going to be reports out there. We get a copy of the report, the buyer can back out of it. Same with this, but you're entitled to a copy of it. The only it's not a problem. There's a flip side of this. You're backing out because of this report you got. I want a copy of it, so I get a copy of it. Okay. Now I put it back on the market. The next buyer that comes along, do I have to give them a copy of that report? If it's a material fact that would affect whether the buyer, yes, that's Easton versus Strasburger. That's under material facts. That's part of the disclosure issue that we have mandated. So original documents, A little bit different than what we have. Copies will work. You don't have to have original documents in this. Equal housing opportunity, we're not going to discriminate based on race, color, sex, national origin, religion, familial status, or handicap status. 7 protected classes now, federal as well as state. This agreement shall be governed by the laws of the state of where? California. So if you say, oh, my buyer wants to buy a piece of property in Illinois, you don't use this form because it's the only laws that are covering this is AIR says, oh yeah, put where you're using it, fine. You just put wherever you want to use it. You can use that form. In my opinion, it's not a nationwide form, but they'll use it as such. And they just make changes to it. It's interesting when you see an AIR form, the whole thing's changed, whole paragraphs crossed out. You'd never do that with this form. CAR says, no, we won't touch it after you messed with it like that. AIR says, put the saddle on it, put a bridle on it, ride it. Okay, we're going to have fun today. Then we get down to other terms and conditions. This offer to purchase above terms. If there's something in here that you've agreed to that is not mentioned in here, then you don't get it. So there's a flyer. That flyer was handed out to the buyer. The buyer says, great, I want to buy this property. It says you get this and this and this with the purchase. If this and this and this is not in the purchase agreement, you don't get it. It doesn't come with it. So that's very specific. They acknowledge a copy of this offer, and that's the law of copy. If you didn't get a copy of it, you don't have to buy the property. You're not obligated to it. That's why we're real careful. If we email this stuff back and forth and we use DocuSign or Digital Ink or biometrics, that they get a copy. So they know exactly what they signed. And that's why when I talked to you about 124 pages, that was verification that who sent it, went out to those people signed it digitally, and it came back to that person. So if they say, I never got it, yes, you did. Here's 124 pages says you got it. Okay. And then time is of the essence. We got time structures in here. You need to get this thing done in a period of time. If you're not getting it done in time, then it's going to nullify the contract. And this is a very time-sensitive contract, and it's for the buyer. The AIR form is a seller contract, and it's kind of blasé. You know, buyer, once you get all your contingencies removed, come back and talk to us, and we'll close. So you can put time limits in there, but it's more, we know it's going to take time. We know you got to look at this. We know this is not the only thing that you're doing. Time is of the essence. And then neither party in this provision may extend or modify without it being signed by both. So there's no under the table, hey, handshake. Definitions. I love definitions. I'll tell you what, why don't we take a little break, get about a 5-minute break, get up, stretch, run around the room, and we'll come back here and we'll finish up and we'll start with definitions here. So let me make sure I've looked at all the questions or any chats. Good, good, good. Okay. I have one here that says, how relevant is, oh yeah, because yeah, exactly. So I see what you're saying, Bland, and it's very relevant as to what the cap rate is, return on the investment, but it may not be to the seller. The seller says, this amount of money I want, you ain't giving it to me, I'm not selling the property. Okay, 5-minute break. What do we got here? 3:15, we'll see you back here at about 3:20. All right, lots of stuff to cover here if we're going to get out of here by 6 o'clock. Oh, that got your attention. No. 4 o'clock. We're going to be done. And we might be able to look at some other items here. So let's see here. All right, so with our bottom page 9, we're going over definitions. And my favorite definition, let me see if I have any chat. So the chat was different costs. Yeah, we result in. The one stipulation that I will make about cap rates is it is based on the fact that if I buy a piece of property, I'm not going to pay anything different on electricity, gas, water, taxes than another buyer. So how it's used may be a little bit differently, but if I'm an owner user, I'm going to use the same amount of electricity, gas, and water, but we know that's all different. So that's why cap rates, because you subtract out of your gross operating income expenses. Well, I have more expenses in this situation than if you were in this situation you would. So that'll affect your cap rate. But if once you've established what that tenant is using, then if you have an investor who's buying that property, the tenant's using the same amount of electricity, gas, water, property taxes, everything else, then that cap rate will be the same. If it's an owner user, it might be different, or if it's vacant, you have to get somebody in there. All right, just to answer that last question. So here's my favorite definition. So I come down here to definition days. Days. Days means calendar days, period. However, after acceptance, the last day for performance of any act required in this agreement shall not include Saturday, Sunday, or legal holidays, but instead be the next day. So what it says is, once you have the contract written, everybody signed it, now it's not calendar days anymore. It is all days except Saturday, Sunday, and legal holiday, because you can't close on Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. You can't, the escrow companies and the lenders are not open. So everything is calendar until such time as we have a deal. And then authority. This is the RCSD. The person signing has full power and authority to do so. And we have a form that we've asked for, a copy of the signing sheet, if it's a LLC, or a corporate resolution, or the signature page for the trust. Okay, so you have the authority, and you're saying, I got the authority to do it. We've said it 3 times now in this contract. We want to make sure that the person signing it, both buyer and seller, have the authority to do so. And the buyer signs, seller signs. Now, do we have a valid binding offer? Remember when you got your real estate license? The buyer signs the contract. We take it over to the seller. The seller signs the contract. We don't have a valid binding offer yet. We have to communicate acceptance back to the buyer. The way this form is designed is we get their initials right here. So buyer signed it, we go to the seller. Seller signed it, we go back to the buyer, say, congratulations, buyer just signed a new home or just bought a new piece of property, sign here. That's the way the form is designed. Remember, I told you who designed the form. It was designed by Standard Forms, realtors. Well, I like this. The problem is I probably will never see the buyer seller in transaction. I might if I'm showing them the property, but in the transaction, and it had anything to do with COVID, it just had to do with how we do business. Very seldom you're sitting in there. Every once in a while, though, I have had a situation where the buyer made an offer, seller said, we want to change it. Seller said, buyer said, change, back and forth. Finally, I said, wait. Let's just get the buyer and seller in the same room and get it done. And I've done that a couple of times. Now, in a residential situation, you would never do that. You would never put the buyer and seller in the same room. Commercial, this is what I want to buy it for. This is what I want to sell it for. The rest is minutiae. We're not going to live there. So it's not like, well, I don't like the pink building. I don't like your pink floor. It doesn't make me money. Yes. Can I buy it and use it and make money on it? Yes. Okay. So, but that's how this is. Now, this says right down here, it says, this is how the form is done, initials. However, you can communicate acceptance back to the buyer on any method you may have under law. So you need to find out what your broker's policy is. And a lot of this stuff is broker policy. My broker policy is you get their initials on here. We digital link it back to them, and they initial it so that there's no discussion. Did you get it? Yes. Is it a valid contract? Yes. There's a myriad of different ways you can confirm it here. It does not have to be that their initials are there. That's just how this form is designed. So however your broker says we confirm, that's fine with me. I'm just telling you that's how this particular form. We're not parties to the contract. Now, this is the D on this portion. This is what we call the broker box. It's outlined in dark letters here. The broker box is very important because D says, seller's broker agrees to pay the buyer's broker the buyer's fee. This is called a cooperating broker's compensation, or a CBC. In a commercial deal, I always use a CBC. We've always used a CBC because we didn't have an MLS we were working off, whereas the MLS under clear cooperation right now under residential says whatever's in there, you got to pay. Well, we never had that. So I would always have to say, here's what I'm going to get. Make sure you're going to pay me. The problem was it wasn't the seller's business. Seller said, hey, my deal is with the listing agent. You got a problem, buyer's agent, you go talk to the listing agent. So you'd have to go and hammer it out with the listing agent. Now it's right in here and it says, hi, I'm part of this transaction and I agree to be paid what is in whatever they're marketing it to me. You want to make sure that this is sent over to the other agent, get them to agree to the CBC, cooperating broker's compensation. It says buyer's compensation, but it's broker's compensation, seller's broker. Because now, if I'm representing the buyer under a buyer representation agreement, that's different. I don't have to worry about this. And a lot of times I will. The agent says, I'm offering this for sale. I'm trying to sell it myself. I'm the listing agent. If you bring me a buyer, you got to get the buyer to pay your commission. People always say, what? That's ridiculous. That's not fair. Well, the fair is in Pomona. What's fair is you got to take care of yourself. So I always say to the buyer, you're buying it for $22 million. My commission is $1 million. So we're just going to buy it for $21 million. You are willing to buy it at 22. We're going to buy it for 21. You're going to give me my commission. You're going to give it to me either way. You're going to buy the building for 22 million, give it to the seller. Seller's going to give it to me, or you're going to buy it for 21 million and you're going to give it to me. Either way, it's same. So what I want to do is I want to make it real clear though. If the broker representing the seller is offering compensation, that I'm going to get paid, because this is the wild, wild west. You don't tell them how much. They'll say, okay, thank you very much for bringing your buyer. You say, wait a minute, where's my compensation? Oh, well, you don't get any. You want to make sure that you're going to get some. And this is signed by the powers that be on the other end to make sure you're going to get this. Now, this last one, this E here, this says presentation of, it says pursuant to standards of practice 1-7. Now, 1-7 has to do with the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics. If you're submitting this to a brokerage that is not a member of NAR, this E has nothing to do with anything. This is our code of ethics from the National Association of Realtors. If they are not a member of the National Association of Realtors, this has no meaning. If they are a member, then they have to have ethics every 3 years from the National Association of Realtors. And as one of the 2 instructors in the state of California that I know of that's been approved to do the live class for NAR's code of ethics, you've got to make sure that if they are, they have to adhere to this. If they're not, they don't have to adhere to this. But here's what it says. If the buyer's broker makes a written request, the seller's broker shall confirm in writing that the offer has been presented to the seller. Because here's what's happening. I take the listing. I'm trying to sell it myself, and I'm trying to get both ends of the deal. You find out about the listing. We're talking about commercial. You make an offer. I say, oh, you know what? I'm not even going to show your offer. I'm making this decision on my own. By law, now this is real estate law. This is under the 10,000 series, under the Business and Professions Code here in California. By law, you must present all offers. If you're the listing agent, you must present all offers. But they get greedy, residential as well as commercial, and they say, I'm not going to present that. So they just put it aside. They find a buyer, they sell it. Later on, the other agent goes, wait a minute. I see on the comps that this property was sold at a lower price than what my buyer was going to pay for it. What happened? Well, what happened was the listing agent got greedy, didn't show your offer. And we've got court cases now going crazy where that's called dual agent and non-disclosure of offers, where the listing agent is going to be in real trouble because they didn't present all offers. So what this basically says is, if the listing agent is a member of the National Association of Realtors, if I think that that agent did not present the offer to the seller, I gave my offer, I represent the buyer, I don't think you presented it to the seller, I can have my broker contact their broker and say, show me in writing. Now, this is a big stick in the RPA, the Residential Purchase Agreement. In here, it's a little stick, because if they're not a member of NAR, they go, go take a flying leap at yourself. I don't have anything to do with any of this minutiae. But if it's residential, they're going to adhere to this. And this is your ultimate to make sure that the offer that you presented was presented. So your broker must contact their broker and ask for confirmation in writing. Now you say, well, what about these two paragraphs down here? The presentation of offer and rejection of offer. These are not required by law. These are being polite. This just says, hey, on this date and time, I presented the offer. And if it was signed, everybody's celebrating, yeah, we got a deal. If it wasn't signed, then the seller initials here and says it was rejected on this date. These are not required by law. They're not even contractual, right? Because they're above the signatures. Excuse me, they're below the signatures. So my office policy is you do this. I don't care what your commercial, industrial, raw land, residential, you do this. And the reason is because this is being polite. It's not required, it's being polite. The buyers and sellers signatures are above this, so it's not part of the contract. So in this particular instance, I've signed it, the buyer signed it, the agents have signed it, everybody signed it. If they don't present the offer and they haven't filled this out, then I can go ahead and I can request this if they are a member of the National Association of Realtors. Most of the large houses are not members of the National Association of Realtors, so they don't adhere to this. Let me see what the chat said. If the buyer signed and the seller signed, then the buyer initials must be signed. Wait a minute. If the buyer signed and the seller signed, then the buyer's initials must be signed. If no buyer's initials, it means no contract. In the purest form and sense of the law, that's correct. So let's go up here and look. So if the buyer has signed the contract, now you know this when you got your real estate license, you learn this. Buyer signs, seller signs, communicate acceptance back, valid binding offer in the state of California. The way the form is designed, the buyer signs, the seller signs, then the buyer initials that they confirmed. You confirm acceptance, here's a copy of it dated, you have bought the property. If the buyer says, nobody ever told me I bought it, you do not have a valid binding offer in the state of California. Now, you don't have to have initials here. You can confirm acceptance in a myriad of different ways. I'm just saying this is how the form is designed. If you understand the law, then you can have it confirmed in other different ways. I'm fine with that, as long as your broker understands what the rules and regs are. Okay, to answer that question. So again, this is one of those situations where they got to be members of the National Association of Realtors. Let me see right here. Okay, how popular is, an escalation clause in California where the buyer writes an offer and the offer price will be escalated above the highest one received. Well, okay, escalation clauses. So I write an offer and I say, okay, I'll buy this building for $22 million. And if somebody else comes in and offer 22.5, I'll go 22.5, 5,000. Okay, well, I got two court cases that say that almost becomes an auction, and that's a valid offer. I just want, if I had an offer like that came in, I'd want to verify that the buyer can make it. If we get a bidding war going, that the buyer can make that 5,000 more than whatever it is. Because if they bid it up to 200 million, buyer says, I'm out of the deal. No, you're $5,000 above that last bid. It's in writing. You signed for it. If you can qualify, you now have to buy this overpriced turkey. That's the only problem I see. So you got to have some limits on the escalation clauses. And there's some other things, and there's all sorts of other things, and that's why it takes a little bit of time to close these commercial deals, where you want to find out, wait a minute, I bought this property in 2019. It's not closed until 2020. We just hit COVID. The value of everything went, whoop, we don't know. Now, real estate, the residential real estate, I can't believe this. A home behind me 2 years ago, 2018, sold for $2 million. The guy fixed it all up, put it back on the market, and just recently sold it for $4 million. But it was overbid by $480,000. In other words, the guy put it on the market for $4 and it was sold for $4.5. I'm like, what's going on here? And I hear this all the time now. I'm saying, wait a minute, how are these lenders doing this? There's no lender involved. This is all cash. So if there's a lender involved in some of this stuff, it's going to hit the ceiling. They're not going any higher because the property will not debt service any higher than that. That's why commercial is, how much money am I going to make? No, it's how much can it debt service? What's the debt service coverage ratio? The lender decides that. You figure out what the income is minus expenses, and that's how much loan you can get. And the appraiser is going to come up with their figures to verify that. You say, well, I think the property's worth $20 million more. Well, then you're going to pay that $20 million cash out of your pocket. Nobody's going to loan you on it because it won't debt service. If they have to take it back in foreclosure, they're always looking at worst case scenario, taking it back in foreclosure. So we got all the signatures, and then we come down to the buyer's inspection advisory. And this is taken right out of the residential. It says you need to find out what the condition of the property is: square footage, boundaries, wood destroying organisms, soil stability. It's almost word for word out of the RPA. However, it's good stuff no matter what you're buying. And under Easton versus Strasburger is our precedent court case in 1984. And it says you agents must disclose anything that would materially affect whether the buyer, seller would sell. And the seller must disclose anything they know, and the buyer must disclose anything they know. But sometimes we're so excited about buying the property, we don't think what the ramifications are. So this is like a little, hey, what about water and utilities? I build houses out in the Inland Empire. I built this house when we first got started back in the 80s. I built this one house, beautiful home, and I said, okay, I want to put it up for sale. And they said, you can't sell it until you get your, let me see. I had to buy a meter. So I bought this $2,500 meter, water meter, put the water meter in. And they said, okay, we'll turn on your water meter when you get a will serve letter. I said, what the heck's a will serve letter? That's the learning curve. Well, the county said, we don't have any water for that house. You should have gotten the will serve letter before you even started building. Now, thank goodness, I only had to wait about 3 months before we could get a will serve letter and get water to the house and get it sold. But that told me I need to make sure I'm knowledgeable about some of these water and utilities. Southern California is a desert, okay? It's a desert. So that means that, the water is here, the water's not. If some smart guys hadn't gone up in the 1920s and 30s and stole all the water from Northern California, this would still be a desert. It's just amazing to me. And then environmental hazards, big deal on that for commercial. Earthquake, fault zones, flood zones covered in your NHD, fire. Now, fire is becoming a big deal. In 2019, there were 3 forms that were put together. 2019, last year, with all the fires we had last year. Nothing what we had this year, nothing compared to this year. Now, I'm sure we're going to have a whole lot more of these insurance situations and disclosures involving fire. There's 3 of them right now that I'm still scratching my head about. As a builder, I have to do something called home hardening, which basically means the property has to be fireproof. Well, whenever I see that, I know it's going to go to commercial also. Well, commercial, we have tilt-ups. You're not burning down the tilt-ups. The roof might burn a little bit, the interior might burn a little bit, but the building's going to be there and stay there for a while. Unless it's just too hot and then it melts you have other kind of problems. But these kinds of things are coming up in the future. And the fire and hazard and other insurance, you may not get insurance. You're in a high fire severity hazard zone, you're not getting insurance. The permits, the property burns down, they won't give you permits unless you meet these minimum property standards, commercial, residential, whatever. And then we're in a rent control state. So J, it's property, rental property restrictions, what you can and cannot do. Now, it doesn't affect commercial, thank goodness. But if you're buying in a rent control state, you have to be cognizant that sometime it might be a situation where your value is affected by what you can collect in rents. And that in a commercial situation, the lenders, they're going to say, doesn't matter whether it's rent control or not, it matters how much rent you can get. If you can only get this amount of rent, we're only going to loan you this amount of money. And then security and safety. State law may require installation of certain barriers, alarms, self-latching mechanisms for risk of children and things like that, swimming pools. Now this there's a lot of, there's a whole list of these things on residential. But if you have, and I can't think of a commercial, they're talking about probably apartment buildings here where they have swimming pools or various other safety measures. Smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, you're going to have the property sprinkled. Commercial California law, it's got to be sprinkled. I even seen some single family homes now that have sprinklers. And it's required by the code in that particular city or county. It's like, whoa. So you got to be knowledgeable about all this stuff. You're going to sell commercial building, you got to know, what there's going to be, there's all sorts of stuff. When I did a medical building up in Brea, I had to make sure the hazmat was handled properly. Now, why does that become my problem? Well, it was a rental property. The doctors were buying it. They were going to move in. They're not going to move in now, but they're going to rent it out to other doctors. So we had to make sure that all the blood and needles and everything were handled properly, or we wouldn't get the loan. So I learned a whole lot about bloodborne diseases, neighborhood, subdivision, personal factors, wild or domestic animals. My backyard is an equal opportunity wildlife preserve. So if I sell my home, I got to disclose that fact. I've driven in commercial areas where the coyotes are running in packs. Nobody's there during the evening. So they're out, nobody's bothering them. You might have to make that disclosure. Everybody signs that, and then possible representation of more than one buyer. This is one of those, and it referred to it in our purchase agreement, but this is one of those that if you don't read this properly, it's going to come back to haunt you. And I told you that's the wild, wild west on commercial. Okay, here you're ready. Realtor A has a listing. Realtor B says, I want to make an offer on it. So Realtor B sends over the offer. Realtor A and the seller are looking at the offer. I find out about the property and I call up Realtor A and I say, hey, Realtor A, my buyer wants to make an offer on your property. Realtor A says, send it over. I said, have you got any other offers? Realtor A says, yeah, we got another offer from Realtor B. I say, what is the offer that you've gotten? Can Realtor A tell me, Joel Carlson, what Realtor B's offer is? Offers are not necessarily confidential. Buyers advise that the listing agent or the seller may disclose the existence of the terms or conditions of the buyer's offer. It's right there. But we don't read this stuff. This is how we get ourselves in trouble. You need to read the stuff you ask people to sign. You should read the stuff you sign. Okay. So basically what this says is Realtor A can tell me what Realtor B's offer is. It's right there. It says right there. So now here's what's incumbent upon you. You're dealing with the buyer. You say, hey, buyer, we're going to make an offer on this property. Buyer says, terrific. I say, did you know that if we make an offer on the property, that seller can tell other agents what your offer is, or that other agent? Most buyers that I've dealt with said, no, I didn't know that. I say, okay, do you want them to? Now, most of the time they say no. I don't want Realtor A to disclose what my offer is to anybody else. Okay, if you don't want that, then we're going to have a confidentiality agreement. It's a form, right, in zip forms. You get the confidentiality agreement signed by the buyer. You send it over to the seller and the seller's agent. They sign it, then they send it back. Once they send it back, I send my offer. Now they cannot tell other agents what my offer is. Otherwise, right there, it says they can. It's getting interesting out there. You need to be knowledgeable in the area in which you deal. If you're not, shift the risk to somebody who is. We finish up with this Consumer Privacy Act. So the Consumer Privacy Act, oh, we got some, let me look down here at the chat, catch up on the chat. How popular escalation? Yes. Does this apply in residential? Yes, it does. Yeah, in the residential, I'm telling you, most of this form, standard forms just went, pasted it into the commercial. It's just there's just a few little parts in it that are a little bit different than the commercial or residential. So now we're looking at this. This is a law that came about in 2019, and it basically says, hey, seller, you're giving us information about your building. We're going to sell this building and we're going to put it out in the MLS. That MLS, whether it's Loops, LoopNet or CoStar, or if it's on Crexi, or if it's on your own MLS, you're putting it out there. That information is going to be taken from there, and it's going to be distributed to the world through over 300 feeds. They call them search engines. Is that okay with you, seller? Buyer, once you buy this property, we're going to report this, and they're going to take your information and they're going to put it out as comparables. Is that okay with you, buyer? So it says the real estate broker is likely to submit this to an MLS. They're going to distribute it to the other real estate communities. You might even get third parties that say, oh, you're selling your commercial building. Do you need to have a mover move your stuff out? So your personal information is open to anybody else that's out there that's on the internet. Is that okay with you, seller? Is that okay with you, buyer? If they say, no, that's not okay, they sign it. It doesn't say what to do if it's not okay. Basically, it just means you're going to have to pull it off of IDX. You're going to have to make sure it's not going out to all these different places. And you're going to have to ask, when I put it in the MLS, because I'm required to under clear, I can't remember the last part of it, clear concept or clear cooperation. I got to put it out there. And if I put it out there, it's going out to a lot of different people. How do I go to clear cooperation and not violate that law or not violate the MLS rules and regs? That's from the National Association of Realtors. Excuse me. And that finishes up. So this is the 17-page industrial form that comes from the California Association of Realtors. I've given you a little bit of a conjunction with the AIR forms. You can buy the AIR forms for $100. If you want to join the AIR, American Industrial Realtors, it's about $700. And they give you the forms, but they give you tokens for the forms. So you can only use certain, or you can be a member of the California Association of Realtors, pay $700, another $199, you get all the AIR forms and you can use them as much as you want. No tokens. So I like that idea. I know the guys at AIR, and it's just a group of people who are trying to do AIR. They don't use it anymore. They just use the acronym AIR. All right. Let me see. Any other questions? Now, along with this, let's talk a little bit. We got a few minutes here. Let's talk a little bit about COVID. I want to show this property. Do I have to have a PDA? A PEAD, excuse me. Yes. If you look at the law says, it doesn't say residential. It says if you're showing property, the inspectors want to come in, they have to have a PEAD. If the buyers want to come in, if the inspectors want to come in, everybody that comes in the building has to have a PEADV. So if we look at that, come over, let's look at it. We'll go down to search. We'll get rid of this and put PEAD. Take a look at that. Oh, of course it won't come up. Oh, we're in the commercial aspect of it. Well, then let's go back over here. And the PEAD, when I look at it, let me go down here. Okay, we've blanked out of this one again. That's if you don't work with the transaction, it always bumps you out because it figures you went to you're sitting at your computer and you went away from your computer, and now everybody else can go on your computer and they can see what's for sale on the MLS. So it always cuts out after a certain period of time, turns you off. All right, let me get my screen working here so you can see what I'm looking at. Oh, wow, it's working. That's interesting. So I'm coming to the California Association, or actually what we used to call zip forms is now called Lone Wolf transactions. And if we come to, let's go to a transaction, we come over here to all forms. In all forms, what I'll do is I'll just go to all, and we'll come down here to COVID sales. Let's just do, so here's all the forms that could be in COVID sales. And it basically talks about property entry advisory. That's the PAD. And it'll say one. Okay, so here's visitor, PAD visitor. So if we look at this particular form, this is the one, and it doesn't say this is a form that you use for residential. It just says anytime person enters the property, they visit the property, they must have one of these. Now, this is an advisory. This is an entry declaration. It is not required by law. What's required by law under all forms is this thing down here, proposed entry rules. These are the proposed entry rules. These are required by law. This comes from the state of California. And it says all parents entering this property must wash their hands. They must wear a mask. They must do social distancing. And don't touch anything. And then it says, because you know, English is your second language, we'll give you pictures. So we have a pictogram here. So this has to be posted. Both of these have to be posted. This comes under it's an agreement with the state of California. So anytime you have property for sale, persons entering this property, not this house, not this condo, this property, must follow this. They must have a property entry advisory declaration. So just make sure that you're doing that with your commercial deals also. Can you explain more on the active passive removal? Yes. And then let's see, how do we document buyer signing the offer authorized on a commercial entity? Oh, you have okay, let's deal with this one. It says, how do you know the person who signed it is really been given permission to sign? Well, if we go back to our purchase agreement, on the real estate purchase agreement, it talks about it right here. This is, oh, crud. It talks about it on the first page of the purchase agreement. It refers to the RCSD. Oh, what the heck is this? Oh, yeah. Excuse me. It refers to the RCSD, which is the one that says, hi, you're a buyer. The person that's buying this property is ABC Incorporated. Do you have the right to sign on their behalf? Yes, I do. Okay, show me that. So you need something from your corporation. You need it from the board of directors. If it's an LLC, you need your signature page. If it's a trust, you need to see who the signatories are on it. And then let me see, there was another one here, and it asked the difference between passive and, oh yeah, screen, thank you. Let me get my screen up here. The difference between passive and active. So an active contract, the CAR contract is an active contract. The buyer says, I want you to fix this, seller. If the seller says nothing, the intimation is the seller's going to fix it. If the seller is not going to fix it, then the seller has to say, I ain't fixing it. Now, active contract back to the buyer. Buyer has to say, okay, seller's not going to fix that. I'm not buying it. Or, okay, I'll forget about that and I'll buy it anyway. Whereas the AIR contract says, I'm the buyer. I want you to fix that. The seller just ignores them. If the seller does not respond, it ain't getting fixed. That's a passive contract. That just says, hey, you're asking for stuff, you ain't getting it. I don't have to even respond to it. It's passive. So that's the difference between the AIR and the CAR right off the bat. And I told you that the AIR contract is a buyer's contract, the AIR's contract is a seller contract, American Industrial Realtors, and the CAR, California Association of Realtors contract, is a buyer's contract. It's designed to protect the buyers. All right, let's see. All right, screen. So explain the refusal to repair something. Okay. And then it's not required by law, therefore no need to sign. If the PADV is not required by law, yeah. We don't know. I'm telling you. March 16th, 2020. COVID hit, they closed down the state of California. The standard forms went, oh my God, what are we going to do? We got to protect our buyers, sellers, and realtors. So they came out with the first form called the CVA, the Coronavirus Addendum. And it just basically said, hey, if we're in the middle of a deal, we may not be able to complete it. Give us more time. Then we came out with the listing agreement, then we came out with the rental agreements, and then we came out with the PEAD that said, hey, if you're going to go and look at property, you buyer have to say, I'm not sick, I haven't been around anybody that's sick, I'm going in the property, and if I go in the property, I'm not going to hold anybody liable if I get sick. That's basically what the PEAD says. And there's a PEAD-S for the sellers saying, I've cleaned everything and I'm not sick. And then the buyer, visitor, they sign one saying, I'm not sick, I'm coming in, and if I get sick, I'm not holding anybody liable. And if the buyer comes in or the potential visitor comes in and the seller gets sick, seller's not going to hold them liable. There's nothing under law. This is just, we do this because it is good business practice. We're trying to protect ourselves because do you think there's going to be court cases involving COVID? People who got it, people who didn't, people who this, people. Yes. And what the California Association of Realtors standard forms is trying to do is give you something to protect yourself. Where you say, wait a minute, you're suing me. Why are you suing me? Because I got sick. I told you, if you go in there and you get sick, I'm not liable. And here's all the things you had to do. So it's not required by law. They don't need to sign it. You don't need to give it to them, but the seller can require it. And most sellers are going to say, I don't want anybody in my property looking at if I don't know whether or not they've been sick or not. So that's where it comes from. And I'm telling you, we don't have any court cases on any of this stuff. We don't know if it's going to work. We're just going, come on, 7, hoping it'll work. All right. So we covered the purchase agreement. We've covered some differences between that and the AIR form. I've let you know that in the real world, they're probably going to require the AIR form. And if it's certain companies out there, they're going to say, this is nice, put it on our form. And our attorneys have said, and I got agreement with the sellers that if you don't put it on the form, we're not even going to show it. So just be ready for that. You can't say, oh, that's not fair. The fair is in Pomona, okay? You ain't getting fair in the commercial deal. You got to fight for this stuff, and you got to make sure that you're knowledgeable in the area in which you're dealing. And that's why I applaud you for being here, because you know more right now than 95% of the realtors out there in this business. They have no clue what you just learned about. They understand the RPA, but they don't understand the CPA, Commercial Property Agreement. And you have a good background on that, so you'll be able to help your buyers and sellers when you go through this. Let me see. We have another chat here. Let me look at this chat. Brokers want signed to protect themselves. Absolutely. From being sued. Now, we don't know if it'll work, but that's the intent behind it. It is also deemed a standard of care. Absolutely. And what does the state of California say? What does the CDC say? Center of Disease Control. You need to be proactive to protect yourself. You have a standard of care. So even though it may not be required by law, it makes sense to do these things. It's a standard of practice. Not aware of any brokers not mandating it. I'm telling you, when it first, come on, this is put together by the California Association of Realtors and their legal staff. If they say, even if they say, we think you probably should use this, as far as I'm concerned, in my brokerage, it's mandated. You betcha. Anybody who's with the amount of power and influence that we have as realtors, if we say this is probably something you should use, I would use it. All right. We now have 9 forms, so they just updated those 9 forms that have to do with COVID. So you can always go to COVID. We go to here, and we were looking here, and in here, let me get back to the screen so you can see what I'm looking at. So when we go back to Lone Wolf, here's the forms library. Let me move this over here. Under COVID sales, here's all the forms that could be under COVID sales. Then if you go to COVID lease, here's all the leases. Here's all the forms under leases. They just added 9 more forms under COVID leases. It was on the front page of your CAR, just happened today. So this is all standard forms. These are people that volunteer their time, realtors such as yourself, to help you protect yourself in this business. 10 forms added today for leases. Okay, 10. All I know is holy crud. And you're supposed to be knowledgeable about each and every one of these. Okay, good. So if you have any other questions, I gave you my information. Feel free to get in touch with me, joel@joelcarlson.com, or give me a call. I appreciate you all being here today. If you do have any questions or any comments, if you're not able to get in touch with me, make sure that you get in touch with Stephanie, and she will make sure that they get to me. And I've done a lot of classes with the AOC. So I want you to keep out there and keep strong. And if you do have any questions or comments, make sure I get them, because anything I can do to help this information get out and disseminated more quickly, easily, and understandable to you, the better it is. You've been a good group. Go out there and sell something. See you in the jungle.